Welcome to this Tuesday, April 24th, 2018, meeting of the Board of Princeton Board of Education. This is also our annual budget hearing. The board is an elected, unpaid group of 10 citizens who set policy and make decisions on educational, financial, and personnel matters for the Princeton Public Schools on behalf of all residents. We're always pleased when members of the community attend our meetings. The board and the school district operate under applicable New Jersey laws and under regulations of the New Jersey State Board of Education. Each meeting includes an opportunity for those attending to comment on items on the published agenda or of other matters of interest to them. The board reserves the right to limit the time allotted to public participation, and law limits discussion of individual personnel and confidential matters. We hope that these meetings provide useful opportunities for communication between the board and the community, so thank you for attending. And just to be clear on a couple things with respect to communication, we have a public comment period. It used to be item K. I'm just checking if it still is item K, but it's in the middle of the meeting. And there's a sign-up sheet, which I believe is still outside. If you'd like to make a comment at the public comment period, happy to do that. We're going to allot about 15 minutes to public comment, and so we're just going to divide that time into the number of people who would like to participate so that everybody gets a fair shot. So if you're thinking you'd like to speak, I believe that sign-up sheet is still out on the table outside. And with that, Ms. Kennedy, would you please call the roll?
Patrick Sullivan.
Here.
Betsy Kelber-Baglio.
Here.
Beth Barron.
Here.
Debbie Braunfeld.
Here.
Jess Deutsch.
Here.
Bill Hare.
Here.
Daphne Kendall.
Here.
Greg Stenkowitz.
Here.
Michelle Tuck-Ponder.
Present.
Evelyn Spahn.
Here.
Brian Liu.
Here.
Amy Wang.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, and so now we're on to item D. Could we have a motion to adopt the minutes of our March 20th, 2018 meeting? Beth, and a second. Betsy. Any questions or comments on those minutes? And we're voting for this online, correct? Good? Almost good? Tell me when we're ready. Not yet? Okay, so now a motion for D2. We met a lot this month, the past month. So D2, the adoption of the minutes for April 10th.
So moved.
Michelle, second. Debbie? Any questions or comments on those minutes? If not, then we're voting online again. Michelle and Debbie, yes. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is D3 for the adoption of the minutes of April 17th, 2018. Can I have a first? Beth, and a second? Debbie? Any questions on those minutes? No. Okay. Okay. So we expect the pace of the rest of this meeting to be a little bit quicker than this. Otherwise, you will have had to bring sleeping bags along. So we'll see if we can move it along. So now we're on agenda item E, acceptance of the harassment, intimidation, bullying, which is consent. Do we need a motion for that? No. Okay. So then now we move on to item F, which is the board president's report. This is our annual budget meeting. In addition to, and partly because it's a budget meeting, we are going to discuss the intricacies of the Cranberry-Sensieve relationship tonight. And so I'm going to cede the time that I would use for my comments to a group of people. One is our outside counsel, Vic Lapira from Fogarty and Hara, who will discuss the legal aspects of the Cranberry-Sensieve relationship. And then under the aegis of the Finance Committee, Greg Stankiewicz and Beth Barron will give their findings on the financial ramifications of the Cranberry-Sensieve. And so, as I said, there won't be questions or comments at that time, but later in the meeting, anyone who has questions or comments on that information is welcome to speak. So I'm not going to have a president's report. I'm just going to turn it over really to you, Vic, and I think you're projecting something, right?
All right, so thanks. In terms of, some of you may or may not know what a send-receive relationship is. Can you hear me, by the way? No. Louder? Okay, let me do this then. Okay, how about that? All right, great. So some of you may or may not know what a send-receive relationship is. So just to give some background, all school districts, or all districts that operate must have a high school, obviously, to send their students. And they have to designate a high school if there isn't a high school within that district, right? So an example, of course, is Cranberry. Cranberry sends its students to Princeton Public Schools, particularly Princeton High School. That's legally required. You have to have this designated high school. Once that relationship is established, and then has to be approved by the Commissioner of Education, it will continue until one of the parties seeks to terminate that relationship. Ultimately, what happens is the sending district pays tuition to the receiving district, which here is Princeton, and that is governed by the parties' agreement, which they have. They have a 10-year agreement. It's the maximum length of time that you can have for a sending receiving. In terms of the question that has come up, either within the community or other individuals may have questions about termination of the relationship. So that's where it becomes a little bit tricky and needs some explanation. You can terminate a send-receive relationship only upon application made by one of the two school districts to the Commissioner of Education. If one board wants to terminate that relationship, it has to initiate legal action against the other board. It has to file a verified petition of appeal before the Commissioner of Education, and often that will involve a hearing. In order to terminate that relationship, there has to be what they call a feasibility study. Essentially, experts in the field of education will come in, will analyze it, and determine whether or not it's feasible for the relationship to end. That feasibility study, by law, must consider the educational and financial implications for both districts. It has to consider the impact on the quality of education for both districts, for the students in each district. And then finally, the effect of the racial composition of each district. The latter part was a particularly significant issue that happened in a case up in Bergen County, Englewood and Englewood Cliffs. That litigation went on for years and years and years, and Englewood Cliffs was not able to, as the sending school, get out of that relationship, which is what they wanted to do. And when I say years and years and years, that basically has been litigated over the course of at least a decade, if not longer. Assuming that one of the boards obtains that feasibility study, and let me be clear too about the feasibility study. How much might this cost to hire some experts to do a feasibility study? For small school districts that are seeking to withdraw, ones that I know about, they've certainly spent at least $30,000, could be $50,000. It's a significant undertaking for the experts to look at all of the information and make determinations about whether or not there would be significant impacts in these areas. So assuming that there is a feasibility study, then the Commissioner of Education would have to make an equitable determination based upon considering all of those circumstances. But the important piece is, if there is a substantial negative impact in any of those areas, then the analysis is over. It's not what they would call a balancing statute, where you look at the various factors. Okay, well, there might be a substantial financial impact, but there's no racial impact and there's no educational impact, so 2 out of 3 does not work that way. If any one of them has a substantial negative impact, the relationship cannot be severed. And that's been confirmed in a variety of cases that you see there. Absecon versus Pleasantville, Englewood Cliffs we talked about. There were a number of districts in the past that sought to terminate those relationships. Even if both boards of education want to end it, that's still the case. You still have to have that feasibility study that demonstrates that there will be no substantial negative impacts in any of those areas. So in 2006, the town of Boonton and the borough of Lincoln Park, originally one of them wanted to leave and the other one opposed it. And then after some discussions, both parties determined, you know what, let's mutually end this relationship. So it was uncontested. The commissioner still denied it. Why? Because the commissioner said that there would be a substantial negative educational impact to Boonton. There was also a pretty substantial negative financial impact, but that there was testimony about, but the commissioner didn't even weigh in on that, because the commissioner at the time said there's a substantial negative educational impact, the analysis is over, we don't have to go any further. And that was, if I recall, in that case, several millions of dollars a year that it would have also been in terms of a financial impact. So that's certainly important. Even if it's unopposed, that doesn't totally end the analysis, because if it is unopposed, there are specific procedures set forth that once the commissioner finds out that it's unopposed, the commissioner then goes and says to the boards of education, you need to announce at your next board meeting that this is going to happen. You need to give members of the public or interested persons 20 days from the date of that announcement to submit your written comments to the commissioner. And that may mean that members of the public may support it or they may say that they oppose it, and they have to address obviously the various issues, whether there's going to be significant educational or financial implications, or the quality of education, or the racial composition of the student population. So members of the public could even oppose it, even if both boards are in agreement. If that happens, the commissioner, after reviewing all of that, can still determine that a hearing is necessary, even if it's unopposed, because the commissioner may want to get more information about whether or not there really is going to be no substantial negative impact in any of those areas. So it might not be as simple as both parties agree and we're done. It could be both parties agree and you still are going to be paying lawyers to have months and months of hearings. Finally, and this is, I say finally, but really this is maybe one of the earlier pieces that we have to look at too. There has to be a high school that's willing to take the sending district students, right? It can't be a situation where the receiving district says to the sending district, we want to terminate, and I don't know where you will send your kids, but that's not our problem. Actually, it is our problem. That was something that was tried in by Mountain Lakes, if I recall. They wanted to get the township of Boonton, which I didn't realize is different than the town of Boonton, but it is. So Mountain Lakes wanted to sever that. If there is no educational alternative, that the commissioner basically said that's a per se significant negative impact. You have to have another place. And so that was in 2002, back in the late 80s, when Absecon sought to leave Pleasantville. They basically said to permit withdrawal in the absence of a demonstrated alternative would basically be the Commissioner of Education and the State Board abdicating their responsibility, and they will not do that. And that case basically was dismissed before it really got off the ground. So that has to exist in order to even consider it. So there is also a statute, 18A 38-21, that talks about terminating a sending receiving agreement. So this is where it gets a little bit obscure. There are agreements that are in place for sending receiving relationships. There are some sending receiving relationships in other towns where they don't have a written agreement for whatever reason. They're operating without a specific agreement. That can happen. But if you want to terminate the agreement before it naturally expires, you also have to meet these other factors. The Merchantville case back from '85 was very clear that it's not one or the other. If you are looking to terminate the agreement before it would end, then there has to be a specific reason. So if the receiving board is seeking to do that, it would only be if it's no longer able to provide educational facilities for the students. If it's the sending board, it's if the sending board determines it's going to provide its high school students with an education either in its own district or in another school district. But there has to be a reason for that. Why? Either because the receiving district isn't providing the school facilities and the educational program that's suitable to the needs of the kids that are coming here, or if the termination would not seriously affect either educationally or financially the receiving district Board of Education. So that's when you could terminate the agreement early. But you still have to have a feasibility study. You still have to demonstrate no substantial negative impact in all of those areas. You still have to have an alternative high school. So it's just a matter of terminating early, or if you let it expire, then you would have to terminate by still doing the feasibility study and everything else. So that's just one additional step. So to summarize here, you have to have one or more boards that want to terminate. If neither board wants to terminate, then it's not going to happen. The district that wants to terminate, or both, if they both want to, have to have that feasibility study. There cannot be a substantial negative impact in any of those areas, either the educational or financial areas, the quality of the education. To give you an example of that, there was one in which I believe it was maybe Lincoln Park, perhaps when they were trying to leave Boonton town. In that situation, it would have seriously compromised the ability of, it would have created two small high schools instead of one large high school. So it would have seriously compromised the ability of the existing high school to offer AP classes or sports teams or things like that. And that's where the commissioner said that's definitely a substantial negative impact in the quality of education. So that was not permitted. And then the racial composition of each district. Again, even if it's unopposed, even if both boards want to do it, members of the public can oppose it. There has to be that alternative high school, and then the commissioner ultimately makes that finding based upon an equitable determination. This one is interesting here. So some people might say, you know, I see the statute on the books, 18A 38-21.1, and it talks about, you know, leaving a school district and joining a regional school district. So, and it also talks about the concept of, you know, how quickly would students leave and whatnot. So a couple things. Number one, in the 90s, and even beyond the 90s, but particularly in the 90s, there was a big push towards regionalization, having regional school districts as opposed to home rule, if you will. That even went so far as resulting in the enactment of this law, 21.1, which allowed, if a sending district was small, if the sending district was sending 3%, or effectively sending students to the receiving high school, and that comprised 3% or less of the entire receiving district, and if they were going to join a regional high school district, and if there was going to be no substantial racial impact to the racial composition of the districts, then it could be done, so long as you did that within 3 years of when the law was enacted in '94. So basically, the opportunity for people to do that expired in January of 1997. So it's still on the books, but it's no longer applicable. But what is interesting is, excuse me, they do talk about, in terms of the termination, they indicate that the termination would happen, essentially, it could happen automatically if suddenly all of the students wish to withdraw, but it specifically says that when you terminate like that, the students can continue their education at the high school. So if you had a freshman who started and then the relationship was going to terminate, that freshman would be allowed to matriculate and go to graduation at the high school. So in theory, it could be done immediately, but most likely it would be done in stages. So the final legal summary here, what are the odds of successfully terminating? Well, without a feasibility study, I can give you those odds because it's 100% impossible, right? Without an alternative high school, once again, 100% impossible. Let's say you have an alternative high school and you have a feasibility study, and the feasibility study says, sure, it's not a problem. There will be no substantial negative impact. But the other board is contesting that. I would say it's unlikely. There have not been many boards that have been successful in doing so. Since the statute changed in '86, I do not recall seeing a single case where the receiving board, the one that has the high school, successfully terminated a relationship. There have been none. There have been very, very few where the sending board has been able to terminate. And as we saw from some of those other cases, even when both boards want to terminate, it doesn't always happen. So I would say if it's contested and both sides are disagreeing, it's probably highly unlikely, because in that situation, if you have, unless the expert who's saying there is a potential a substantial negative impact, unless that expert has no credibility, the commissioner is probably going to defer to that one and not sever the relationship. Let's assume that both boards want to do it and you have everything you need, but members of the public oppose it. Hard to say. It's going to depend upon what information the members of the public present, and the commissioner ultimately has to look at whether or not the commissioner believes there will be a substantial negative impact, right? So in the case that we talked about before, even though both boards said there would be no significant impacts, the commissioner said, well, it would have a significant impact on the quality of the education of the students, so I'm not permitting it. And then the last one, what if everybody wanted to do it? Which is basically what happened with Lincoln Park and Boonton. We still don't know. It still might not go through, which is what happened with the commissioner there. So what is likely? You would have costly legal fees for both districts. I mean, this is not something that, you know, would be one in which a district files the petition, the other district answers, and then next thing you know, we have a hearing and it's over in a couple of months. I mean, this is probably a year or longer, if not 2 years. You would have expert fees as well, and as I said, for the feasibility study, you're probably paying tens of thousands of dollars, and then those experts typically don't go to testify in court for free. You typically have to pay them to go there. So you have those fees as well. And the feasibility study, basically, I wrapped into that. And probably both sides would get some type of feasibility study, because if there's opposition, one would say that it is feasible, the other one would say it isn't, and so both districts would spend a lot of money on that. And again, once again, how often since the statute was amended? Just by way of background, it used to be, you'll see if you do the research, back in the 70s, there were a fair amount of withdrawals. That's because back then all you needed was good cause, is the terminology. In '86, they said good cause is not enough. There has to be no substantial impact in any of those areas that we talked about before. So since then, have I seen any cases, and we looked, for any receiving district to terminate successfully? We did not find any. So just based upon that alone, it's probably incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for a receiving district to terminate this relationship. And that is the legal analysis. Goes to Greg.
Thanks. So I wanted to thank our council for that, and Beth and I are going to cover two other aspects of the relationship, which is the demographic impact and the financial impact. But before we do, I just wanted to briefly mention the spirit in which we're doing this. And I first wanted to thank President Sullivan for allowing us this opportunity. And second of all, just to say that we're doing this because this board has been discussing various aspects of the relationship for about a year now. Not all members of the board were here last year. I was. But I know there's still misinformation out there, and I still know there's still a lot of people who want more information. And I was shocked because I thought everybody in the public watched us religiously every month, But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for most of you, that's not the case. So we thought this was a good opportunity for us to put out what we have heard over the last year. We're doing so in a spirit of humility, in a spirit of openness, and we're going to try to share all our data sources so that the members of the public can check on all this. The data's out there, and if we're also a little bit lucky, because if we do make a mistake, we've got our board counsel here tonight, we've got our business administrator here tonight, and we've got various other experts on our own board. So we're doing this really more as a discussion more than anything else. Okay. So the demographic impact, what we did was, following up on what our board counsel said, we're assuming what would the demographic impact be even if the partnership were to be terminated. And we realized, as counsel said, that even if it were to be terminated, we would want to make sure that any student who's in our high school would be allowed to graduate. So that changes the impact over time. And that's what Beth and I put together. Oh, sure. Why don't you go ahead?
So basically, we had to do some hypotheticals. Can you hear me? Yeah. And to illustrate this, we took the information from our demographers report, and we looked at the projections, and we put on the left side the total number of students at Princeton High School, which are projected for the next number of years. And the numbers that are in red show where we're over the capacity, and the capacity of the school being 1,423. So we then went and looked at the numbers that had been anticipated for the Cranberry enrollment, and that you look basically at who's in 8th grade at Cranberry each year and which class is going to come into 9th grade. So you think if we want to just look at that 9th grade number, and then you would we're assuming that we would unroll the relationship over 4 years. So you would start hypothetically in 1819, which obviously could never happen. It's right next year, but we thought just for purposes of this discussion. So we took the number on the left, the 1562, and we subtracted 48. So that would reflect a Princeton High School with one Cranberry class not attending. So the freshmen would not attend. So you went to 1514. And we went on from there and we accumulated the number. So the 1589 would be the full estimate, and then you would take away 2 classes. And on the next year, it would take away 3 and 4 until there were none. And obviously, the result is that, in fact, every year going forward, except for 2020 and 21, we would still be over capacity. So this was just to show that even if Cranberry were not to be at the high school, we would still be out of space. Basically, one year we wouldn't, but we're off by 2, I think 2 children in that year. So we're pretty close.
And then we took this data that we put together and compiled, and we just superimposed it on the line graph that our demographer prepared for us. He prepared multiple versions. So what we did to make it as easy as possible for members of the public to double check us is we used the data that was in the January 2018 presentation, because in that presentation, our demographer broke out the Cranberry numbers separately and presented all the data. So that data is also on the district's website, so it's easily checked as well. These numbers would then have been adjusted a little bit going forward because of the affordable housing decision that came down, and when City Council in the near future comes up with a plan, these numbers will be adjusted again once we know what the municipality still owes in terms of its affordable housing obligations. But as you can see, oops, I'm sorry. As Beth said, there is a dip if we were to ask our Cranberry students to leave, but would be only 1 year, and it's very, very tiny, that we would come back down to capacity, and then we'd go right back up again. So there's no impact where there's any breathing room if you do any actions, because the overcapacity crisis would just continue.
Okay, so we did some. Do you have the clicker? Just how do you do it?
Just going forward.
Okay. So we just did some real rough numbers on the financial side too. Again, this is very complex to say how much when we're looking at our per pupil costs and how we divide up the costs. But we want to just show you, first of all, that there is a tuition that's set by the state for Cranberry. It's based on the audited financials of the district, and it's $17,191. So every time we get an additional student, we get additional payment. We lose a student, we lose that payment. So the money goes up and down per student. Our per pupil cost, according to the Department of Education, is $19,047. There's another number that's also published on the Department of Education website that looks like 25 or something like that. Just so you know, that number, if you look at the fine print, is the number that the state says is a per pupil based on their pension costs that they pay directly to former employees of our district, and amounts that are put into the school funding program for other schools that are doing construction. So there's all these payments that come from the state that go out on behalf of schools that we don't see. It doesn't come through our budget, and we don't consider that, and they don't consider it for comparison purposes to be a per pupil. So if you take the 19,000 number, that's a pretty good number. And the difference between that and the 17 is that Cranberry does pay additional amounts for in-house special needs services, so their number doesn't include that. And it also reflects the fact that our population of students in Princeton has a very different profile in terms of services like English as second language, free and reduced lunch. We just have a different population, so that does affect our cost.
But for those of you following at home, the data source, there's a number of different data sources that you can check this by. But what we're using is the budgetary per pupil cost that's given to us by the state. And one of the sources that's easily accessible is the Taxpayer's Guide to Education Spending. So on the 2017 version on page 4, the state explicitly says to use this for comparison purposes. This is the best number, the 19,000, to use for comparison purposes.
So then the simple kind of math that we receive in 2016-17, we received $4,813,480 for, I think, approximately 270 children from Cranberry. That number, if you look at our budget, is 6% of our total revenue for that year. It is the second largest source of revenue, the largest source being the levy that we receive from taxpayers. It's approximately a third of the total PPS discretionary budget. So that means that's the money that we actually can influence by cutting and looking at that's not tied to teacher salaries and benefits and charter school payments and other things that are fixed that we don't really have any control over. So it is a third of that money. So without Cranberry, our budget base would contract by almost $5 million. So if you took that away. And we just sat and tried to figure out how do we explain this in another way. It's already been explained by the district in some documents that some people, I think, are not happy with the way it's described. But so we tried to say, okay, let's think about it a little bit differently. So we said, let's pretend we're going to unwind over 4 years. And what would this really look like on a basic level? So, for example, say we started in 2019. There's 48 children from Cranberry. Now, the Cranberry numbers are going down in the next couple of years. There's only, for example, 48, 50, 70, and 52 coming in into the ninth grades. So the first year is 48. So if you assume that they did not attend PHS, we would then not have tuition revenue of about $825,000. Obviously, we do have some savings without these children. So there's 48 kids not here. So there would be some core classes where we wouldn't necessarily need the teachers. So we were speaking with the administration, and I think it's kind of, they said, well, you could assume perhaps that they sought less than 25%. We said, let's say 25% of that is the teachers would go away, no children, so you'd be kind of neutral. But you would then, in addition, because those are the direct costs of those children, but they also support the indirect costs, which is the lights, the administration costs, the heat, the buildings, the librarian, the counselors, all the other things that are kind of shared across the district, not even just in the high school. So you would lose the revenue that supports indirect costs if you thought about it. The 75% is about $618,000 for that year. The next year, you would have 50 that didn't come. So now you'd have two classes. You'd be missing the 48 and the 50. That year, you would lose from those 50, you'd lose $859,550. That's just those children. Again, you'd have a direct savings of about maybe say 25%. I mean, we can argue about the percentage, but there's some percentage that's direct and some that's indirect. So we just use 25% for the purpose of the model. So again, you'd have a lost revenue, though, that would support indirect costs of about 644. So we kind of went each year, gave you 4 years. And at the end, you could say that we have 220 less children. But at year 4, you have a total annual lost revenue that would support indirect costs, so kind of the larger district costs of $2,836,514. So we would be short that money. And we would obviously have to reduce the budget by that amount. And if you looked at where we could make that up, as I mentioned, this all comes out of kind of the discretionary pot because we have this large portion of our budget that's already tied to the teacher contracts and benefits. So you would have to it would largely be in staff. And so if you divided that and assumed a staff position of a starting salary about $80,000 with benefits, that's about 36 full-time staff at the high school or across the district. So that's how many headcount that would equal. And one other thing we wanted to kind of just talk about with people, I've had a lot of questions about, well, why can't we then just decrease the size of the high school, capture that savings to taxpayers, and fix the operating budget problem? Unfortunately, school district's not like a household where you have a mortgage, and if you don't pay, you pay off your mortgage, you can kind of move the money around and pay in a different pot. There's two distinct budgets here that we're talking about. There's two separate tax levies. And the operating budget that we use to run the schools every year that we're going to be talking about tonight is subject to a 2% annual cap. So we are not allowed to increase the budget by more than 2% unless we have a specific waiver from the state. And the state only gives waivers for some very specific circumstances, including rapid enrollment increases, which we have been experiencing, and healthcare costs that are going up faster than the state plan, if I'm correct in that. So there's some very specific exceptions. It doesn't apply to the fact that you've just let go a send-receive relationship or you've reduced enrollment. So you have an operating budget that's capped, and if you have a big loss in your operating budget, there's no other source of revenue really for you. Your capital budget is where you are able to go to voters in a referendum and say, we would like to incur this long-term financing to take care of our capital assets, our buildings. So you could, if you reduce long-term borrowing, say you could reduce the size of the PHS renovation, say you're taking out these 270 children or 200 children going forward, it doesn't free up, if the taxpayers pay less for that, it doesn't free up money that can then go back and fix the operating budget. So you have two separate buckets, and they don't kind of connect. They're separate.
And here we're building off of the work that the chair of the Finance Committee did last year, Bill Hare, as well as a fact sheet that our business administrator did last year as well.
Right, so just in terms of the facts, we wanted to say that even if you didn't have Cranberry, you would still have a capacity problem. PH enrollment would remain over capacity every year except for one where we would be under by 2 students. This has nothing to do with John Witherspoon in the elementary schools, which are at capacity or almost at capacity, and they would continue to be overcrowded because Cranberry only sends children to our high school. And we would have substantially less operating funds to operate the schools, and we would need to cut staff and increase class sizes, and presumably there would be impact on course offerings and that type of thing. So we just wanted to put that information out there, and I'm sure that people may still have questions, and I think we would be happy to have them sent to us. And we also are going to have a public comment section later in the meeting.
And that this also aligns with the rest of the discussion we'll have this evening about our budget as well. So.
Can I, that was really great, guys. And I've been in a lot of meetings, so this was really great. It was very like ABC, go through it. So one thing I was curious, or I thought, with the Cranberry also pays for all their buses. Yeah. So I know when we do our calculation of like the 19047, which you guys have, that has our buses in it. Doesn't?
Yeah, actually, that 1904, they take the bus,
It
those
does.
out
Okay,
as
okay.
well. So we're trying to compare apples and apples.
Oh, perfect. All right. No,
Yeah.
and that's great because then that helps me. Thank you.
I just had a question for you, Vic. If you said that there were no receiving districts that have successfully terminated unilaterally, have you seen any cases where districts have tried, or is it just something that a district wouldn't try because of the financial impact of it in a 2% cap world?
It's rare. The only one that I can remember, the 2 districts that may have tried, I think Mountain Lakes tried once unsuccessfully, and I think the other one might have been, I'm trying to remember now with the town of Boonton and Lincoln Park, which one moved. I think it might have been the Sending, actually. So I think really the only one that tried in recent history is Mountain Lakes. So I really haven't seen it. Also, one thing that, before I forget, that came to mind, I think that projection was very helpful to see when you might potentially, in theory, be under capacity, but unless you could wave a magic wand right now and there would be no Cranberry students starting next year, realistically, if both sides wanted to terminate, you're probably not effectuating that before 2020, so you probably will never be under capacity, even in best case scenario. So that's something that, which I think was helpful to be illustrative, but also looking at it from the legal point of view and when you could really effectuate that, earliest is probably 2020, if everybody wanted to do it.
Okay, and then my other question is, someone wrote in the paper recently that the fact that this would take 4 years to sort of work itself out is a good thing, because then we could sort of adjust and it would all be fine. First of all, I guess the first question is, would a 6% loss of our operating budget, do you think, in your opinion, be something that the commissioner would?
Substantial negative impact?
Yes.
I think it would be, yeah.
And so if it happened over 4 years, would that be not material anymore? There's nothing to worry about?
No, I don't think it is fundamentally going to make a difference, because while you stagger it, right, over a 4-year period, it's building upon itself, right? So if, let's say the first year you're only losing 600 or 700,000, and the next year it's another 600 or 700,000, but that's now 1.2 to 1.4 million dollars less in your budget, and then it just continues, right? So your budget overall is being decreased, whether it happens, all in one fell swoop, which is harder to deal with, or whether it happens over the course of 4 years. It's still a pretty substantial impact to your overall budget when you're talking about 6%.
Like to add, I mean, your enrollment's going up. So you're decreasing your budget at the same time that the Princeton students are growing. So, I mean, you can, differ with the demographer, but however that slant of the line is going, enrollment will be going up and your budget will be going down every year.
And the one other factor is that it's already been mentioned, is the 2% cap by the state. That's a recent development. So a lot of the case law happened even before this cap was imposed on us. But once you have a cap, if your base is reduced, you can't catch back up, And that's a substantial sort of reason why it would be such of an impact on our operating budget.
And also the 2% cap is on the tax levy. So you look to last year and you say, what was I able to charge and ask the taxpayers to support last year? What is that total amount? That is where the 2% levy goes up. You have a 2% increase on that. So every year if you're going down and you're decreasing your budget, you're just kind of going in the other direction. So.
Okay, any other questions from the board?
I just ask, when you talk about the need to have an alternative school district, that the onus is on the receiving district to find that school district?
In the
What
big picture, yes. But from a practical standpoint, if the receiving district were to want to terminate and the sending district has nowhere to go, until the sending district finds somewhere to go, it's practically not going to happen. I mean, the commissioner is not going to say, you had a couple of months' notice, you have to find some place, too bad. That's not going to happen. I mean, now, I suppose if this is in theory, because again, I haven't seen a receiving district terminate successfully. If a receiving district wanted to terminate, and let's say they gave 2 or 3 years' notice to the sending district, and the sending district, didn't find anything then, my guess is what would happen is the commissioner would tell the sending district, you need to go find a place, and you need to do that by a certain time. But certainly the commissioner is not going to order a dissolution, even if everybody wants it, until there's a place for those students to go. I mean, until that is located, it's all academic, frankly.
Vic, I just have a procedural question. Is there an appeal process beyond the Commissioner of Education?
Yes. So, and although we haven't seen a lot of that in the withdrawal cases, when there was a case where one district tried to leave a regional high school, that was the Manchester Regional High School in Passaic County, and North Haledon tried to leave, and Haledon and Prospect Park and the district itself didn't want them to leave. Any commissioner decision is appealable to, now it's only to the appellate division and then potentially to the New Jersey Supreme Court. That case, which our office handled, did go to the New Jersey Supreme Court. That case probably took, I don't remember if it took 5 years, 6 years. It was a long time before that was finally decided. And the district that wanted to leave was not able to leave.
So those Supreme Court upheld the commissioner.
Right. Ultimately, what happened was there was some minor, only for regionals, it's not getting too much into the weeds, there was some adjustment to how much each district paid. because with the regional, it's a little bit different. There's not a per pupil cost that they pay. It's based upon valuation of the homes in the district and everything else. So that's the only thing that was really accomplished after many years and lots of money paid to lawyers.
So just a question, it's a historical question. So when I joined the board, I had questions about this relationship, and I wondered how it worked. I think probably every board member here wondered how it worked, and as they, you've got 10 people here, I think understand how it works and have for some time. But it's easy to look at that and go, oh, there's a contract, it can terminate, therefore we can kick everyone out. See, it's not so easy. But my question is, where I was growing up outside of Chicago, we had a school district and it covered multiple towns. And so there was never a question, everybody paid taxes the same way, you got assessed and you paid taxes, and there was never a question about solving a crowding problem just by kicking out of town, because that was the district. Here it has this feel of it being something that's severable when by law and by the finance, and they dovetail, right? Because the financial damage would be one of the things under the law that would prevent us from having a successful termination anyway. So can you just tell very briefly the background? Why does New Jersey do things this way with the send receive? Why don't they just have a school district that covers multiple towns? Because in effect, as a practical matter, that's what this is, with two different funding formulas, one that's a per head and the other one's basically taking the whole budget and allocating across the town. But
Right.
in effect, from a practical matter, it's one school district. So why don't they just, where did that ever come from with this idea of sending and receive?
Yeah, so it is one of the things that makes New Jersey somewhat unique, and it's the state that we live in. But for a long time, there has been this kind of idea of home rule, if you will, and so there were a lot of school districts that did not want to consolidate or regionalize and become large regional districts. So there are many districts where they say we've been a K-8 for so many years and we want to remain that way, and we want to have control over what happens at this level, as opposed to one Board of Education that could potentially subsume 7 or 8 different towns. I mean, up in Bergen County, there's a regional that I can think of, a regional high school that has 2 high schools, and there are 8 towns that have K-8 schools. There's other places like that in New Jersey as well. It's not unusual. But right, to accommodate that, I mean, every school district has to have a high school. And so as a result of that, either regional high schools were formed or you had these send receives. It's one or the other that has to exist, unless people consolidated. And again, in the 90s, there was that push towards consolidation, but even that didn't really result in a lot of districts consolidating for a variety of reasons, not only because of the home rule issue, but oftentimes consolidation looks like it's going to result in a cost savings, and it may not result in any cost savings. So that's historically, there have always been these small K-8s. There are even some in Bergen County that are K-5, and then they have like a 6, 7, 8 regional, and then a 9 through 12 regional. So there's a lot of interesting and unusual school districts in New Jersey.
Okay, good, thanks. So I'd like to just take a moment and maybe split our public comment, and maybe you did on the agenda, split our comment into 2 sections so that if people we have 11 people, well, actually 9 people who signed up for comments, and some of them specifically say Cranberry. But if you wanted to use your public comment time now, we can limit it to 3 minutes. I think it would probably be enough. So if anyone wanted to ask questions at this point in the board meeting about this specific issue, this would be a good time to do so. We'll ask you to come up to the microphone, identify yourself, and we'll give you 3 minutes if anyone would like to do that now. Oh, is it 2 minutes? Okay, sorry, it's 2 minutes. So hope that doesn't change what you're about to say. Yeah, just.
Okay, so this is mostly like to the community because you guys have addressed
So
this.
sorry to interrupt, but can you just say who you are and where
I'm
you're?
Shoshi Henderson. I'm a freshman and I live in Princeton and I go to PHS.
Thank you.
So I'm here tonight despite having homework and tests to study for because I have so many close friends and teammates that live in Cranberry. Even though I just met them this year, I can't imagine the past school year without them. I feel that someone has to advocate for them and explain a quick couple of reasons why they should be treated with respect and civility as valued members of our high school community. Not that this should have to be said, but if you look beyond the numbers for a moment, one can find that each individual contributes to our school in one way or another, as a friend, academically, athletically, through the arts, and so on and so forth. The point is, they are people and not objects or numbers. I know in the past few weeks there have been a lot of focus on school budgets and all the things we need in the schools, like more space and better security. I get it's hard to pay for all of this, and I can understand why people in our community care so much about it. But what I don't like to see is that someone from Princeton put out a public survey on the Nextdoor Neighbor app asking people if they think Cranberry should be allowed to renew its contract and send kids here. And there are adults trying to spread this sort of idea like it could be the answer to our school's problems. This is just wrong. Do adults realize how awful this sounds? These are kids, and PHS is their school, just like it is mine. So I ask all of you to please find ways to figure out these complex problems without treating Cranberry kids like they are somehow on a chopping block. I've even heard the phrase, just get rid of these Cranberry kids. They deserve better. Thank you for all the time you put in and all the night meetings you attend like this to make our schools better.
Thank you. Anyone else like to get up now and talk? And again, it's a 2-minute limit. If you can just identify yourself.
Yes, my name is Daniel Dart. I'm a parent of a daughter who graduated last year and went through K through 12th grade, or first through 12th grade, and a parent of someone in the 4th grade. And to build on what this lovely young lady said, my oldest daughter, who's now a freshman in college, went to the prom with a Cranberry student. And they dated for several years, and he was a wonderful individual. We got to know his parents and his family, his siblings, and we loved him. So we love Cranberry and have no problem with it. It has nothing to do with Cranberry. It's a wonderful community, and so forth. You know, and I'm going to have to talk quickly because I only have 2 minutes, and I just used some of that time. But clearly, the send-receive relationship from a legal point of view is up in 2 years. And so I don't think there's any reason, it's a 10-year agreement, that you couldn't make arrangements not to renew it now. I'll just make that one point. The agreement ends in 2020, so we're in year 8 of a 10-year agreement. So that's just some context. The other thing that struck me as odd is that to do this feasibility study, we're worried about spending, I don't know, $35,000 to $50,000, and that's a lot of money. And I'm concerned with every dollar that we spend. But we have no problem asking the taxpayers to borrow $130 million, which comes with an annual interest payment of $5.5 million. And taxpayers have the right to ask these questions as it relates to the high school. Now, the send-receive arrangements make a ton of sense when school enrollment is falling, or when one school has excess capacity. That's not the case here. Princeton schools are increasing in enrollment. Now, the hit to the budget on the operating side assumes that Princeton students aren't there to take their place, or that new households aren't being formed that are sending kids to Princeton schools. The whole point of this is to quote Steve Cochran in an email he sent to all us parents, find solutions for the overcrowding at John Witherspoon and PHS in particular. We're overcrowded by 200 students. Now, with all due respect to some of the projections, some of them are very long term, and no one can predict the future. The projection that I saw is that Princeton High School is going to increase enrollment by 75 students through the year 2022. Now, we haven't had a economic downturn since 2009. If we have a recession, which is a normal part of the business cycle, all of those reasons, all of those projections are going to go out the door. So $130 million is a lot of money. And before you go to Princeton taxpayers and ask for that, you ought to make sure that all the ducks are in order.
Can we just wrap up? You're well over 3 minutes now.
Okay. Well, let me just make a couple of points quickly. One is Princeton's budget is $23,000 per student. We're losing $6,000 here. I think it's great that all students would be able to graduate and phase out, right, which would allow new Princeton students to take their place.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
So, Vic, if you could just clear up, I mean, there seems to still be some confusion out there. even after this presentation. But if the send receive contract were just allowed to expire, could you just explain again what would happen?
Sure. So there is a provision about the early termination of the send receive agreement, right? That's the one that would require you to demonstrate other factors, such as if Cranberry wanted to leave, that they are going to educate their students somewhere else, and that the reason that they want to leave is because they're not getting there's not appropriate facilities or education here, or that it won't significantly impact Princeton. Likewise, Princeton could seek to terminate early if it was unable to provide facilities for those students. But once the agreement expires, the relationship still continues until one of the two boards moves, or both boards move, to terminate the relationship. And that still requires you to prove all those factors. No substantial negative impact either to the finances or the education, or to the quality of the education, or to the racial composition of the district. So that whole process still has to take place, even if both boards right now said, let's just let it lapse, we won't do anything. So starting with the 2020-2021 school year, Cranberry students are still going to be going here to the high school. The only way that would ever stop is if one of both boards actually tried to sever the relationship independent of the contract. If you want to terminate the contract early,
So we still
it's just
go through
another
that
hurdle.
process.
Right. It's just another thing you have to do.
Okay. So a question for you, Beth. Again, could you explain again what would happen in a year where we had more Princeton students show up? Would our budget go up? Would we get more revenue for that?
No. Princeton students, whoever shows up, we educate them. We don't get any additional revenue. The Cranberry students do have a per head tuition, but the Princeton students do not bring us any additional funds. So yeah, you could say, well, we don't have Cranberry students, let's fill in the seats with Princeton students, we'll be just fine. Well, no, we still have the same amount of money. In fact, we have less, and we have to educate those children.
Thank you. And then one other thing, just a comment about the recession. It's interesting, in 2009, we had a little bit of a spike in enrollment, especially at the high school, as in a recession, people, I think, maybe decided they didn't want to pay private school tuition, so we had a lot of private school kids come back. So our population tends to rise in recessions, not fall. So it's just an interesting fact. Yeah, Michelle?
But if we build more ratables, we will have more taxpayers and we will have more revenue. So
No.
in that event, then if we build a 4-bedroom house and there are 3 teenagers in that house, and you have a new basis for assessing taxes, then we'd have more money.
No. If we had 100, let's just say we had $100, and we built the Empire State Building here in Princeton, what that would mean is that we'd still have a $100 budget. We'd not go up a penny, except for $102 the next year and $104 whatever, as the 2% cap goes into effect. Right. But the denominator of who pays that $100, the Empire State Building would be paying a significant percentage of that $100. So our budget is capped at 2% flat.
Okay, it's 2% increase in the prior year tax levy. So that's the driver. So if it was a $70 million tax levy, it would be a $1.4 million increase the following year. And as Pat said, that $1.4 million would then be spread over a greater number of people, so the tax impact would be reduced, but the budget would not be increased.
Actually, Pat, if we did have the big, say we get a bunch of new houses, right? Enrollment increases, we can increase above the 2%. So we could give a nice big tax increase to cover all the new
Potentially.
Now, beyond the
that
2%.
Well, so there is a waiver for enrollment increases that goes according to a very stylized state formula. And if we meet it, yes, then we can, in fact, this year we will be raising taxes higher than 2%, mainly because of that enrollment increase waiver. But there's no guarantee that an enrollment increase in and of itself would trigger that waiver. It happened to do it this year for us, but it wouldn't necessarily trigger the waiver. So if more people move in, yes, you do have there's a potential to raise taxes over 2%. And the ratables have gone up so that it would be spread out over those ratables. But it's very factual in nature. Does that make sense?
Stephanie, so this year's enrollment waiver is banked, right? So that's not from this year, it's from prior years?
We did get some adjustment in our tax levy consideration by the state due to enrollment for this year, but the additional 600 that you'll see is from banked from prior
So
years.
do you know off the top of your head, what percentage is the increase in the tax levy based on the enrollment waiver?
No.
No. Do you think it's more, do you think it's it's not 2%, right?
I don't.
You don't know, okay.
I'm not sure what you're asking. No.
Isn't it
So-
like
so what-
600 and something thousand?
No, but that's banked. So that was money that we had left over.
Or from the past enrollment waivers?
Because you can spend it over 3 years.
Okay.
No, my question is will the increase in the tax levy allow us to keep up with the rise in enrollment to the extent that the current tax levy allows us to operate the district?
Well, the only opportunity we would have to increase above 2% next year is if the state either gives us an adjustment because our enrollment went up a significant amount. So then they would give us an adjustment that they would recommend what our levy would be, which could be over 2%. But if that doesn't happen, then we get 2%, that we have no other opportunity in the following year after this year.
Okay, are there questions or comments from the public at this time?
Hi, my name is Jim Bash, and I have 2 kids at JW, so we're not quite at the high school yet, but looking forward very soon. And I just wanted to thank you all in taking the time and going slow and unpacking this issue for all of us residents. I'm kind of new to board meetings, and so I had a lot to learn. And there are a lot of misconceptions out there about this issue. I know you all probably know it pretty well, but even among some of you, I'm seeing questions. So you're finding out, you're learning more, probably not as much as I'm learning more. But the key thing I wanted to say is that there are people who still think, and I was dialoguing with one of them this afternoon, that all we have to do is just, we don't renew the agreement in 2020, that's it. It's that simple. And I will admit that up until last week, I was one of those folks who thought that maybe it's something that we should look closer at and investigate, and I'm glad that we're doing that. But I thought it was simpler than it sounds like it is. And it's easy to find simple answers, we know, in our current environment that to complex problems that don't always work out. So it sounds like to me this agreement is more or less almost like a merger. I think you sort of intimated that. It's like a merger of 2 districts, maybe not operationally, but in terms of the general sense, it's like an adoption for life unless something extraordinary happens whereby both districts want to get out of it. And not only that, they don't even have the final say, it's the state. And there are all these criteria that have to be met for both sides. So I feel very educated about this, and I hope that you will put that PowerPoint presentation up in a very prominent place so that we can all learn more about it. And I want to thank Vic, for that excellent presentation. And I'm here to be, I was ready to be swayed, and I feel like more confident, like I have the facts to understand the situation now. And I had one question, and it hasn't been asked here yet, and I don't know if you can answer it, but my question is, and it hasn't been stated, is does Cranberry have an official or public or even off-the-record position on this question? Is Cranberry willing to say they would be on board with exploring this further, or it would be a hostile dissolution? I mean, do we know?
I can speak. I'm certainly Evelyn could, but I could also. I spoke just this week with the president of the Cranberry Board of Education, and they're very eager to continue the relationship. They think it's been a good relationship for them, and they would like it to continue.
Okay, that's what I want to know. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, sorry, I've got to readjust this. Hello, my name is Raisa, and I am a sophomore at Princeton High School. So a lot of the points that I wanted to make tonight have already been said because we had this beautiful presentation, which was so helpful. Thank you so much again for doing this. I just want to reiterate a couple of points. One is that even if we did break, and let's just ignore the financial and the human impact of this for a minute, even if we did break the send-receive relationship with Cranberry, we would still be over capacity. First of all, it only impacts, as was mentioned in this presentation, it only impacts the high school, which means that we would still have the problem with the middle school and with the elementary schools. And the high school would still be an overcapacity in every single year other than 2020 to 2021, which probably wouldn't even be the case anyway with the legal issues. So we would still be in a situation where we would have to have a referendum to solve that. Unless you wanted to, and then who would we kick out next? Would we just kick out everybody whose families have been here for less than 2 years because they haven't paid taxes for as long? The second point I want to make, which has been already made by somebody here tonight, is that Cranberry students are a part of our community. There's no difference between the Princeton students and the Cranberry students. If you asked people at Princeton High School, they would say that. And there's such a wonderful impact and such an incredible things that Cranberry brings to the table. I've seen the entire Cranberry community rally around a student who did not have enough money to attend university. He was a low-income student, and the entire Cranberry community rallied around to raise enough money so that he could go to university because he was that much a part of the community. If you want another example, I suppose you should look at our Cranberry representative, Ms. Spahn, who sits here every meeting and listens to people talk about how we should break this agreement and does so with understanding and compassion. I think that's the best symbol if you need anything. So those were the points I wanted to make. But thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Raisa. No, well, so if you've signed up on the sheet, and I know you have, Charlotte, so if you'd like to step up.
I'd just like to make a few comments and some questions. The Cranberry issue.
Sorry, could you just identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ralph Perry, and I have been living in Princeton for more than 50 years. The Cranberry issue, if I understand our esteemed lawyer here, is a mess. And I wouldn't go to court on that because it will never end. But what I would like to know is, since we are not determining how much Cranberry is paying, the state does. And for some reason, which according to US 1 Weekly, they don't pay for capital expenditures, only for normal expenses. If we go with a new bond, they wouldn't pay for this. So I would suggest that maybe instead of going and asking the state to take Cranberry out of here, why don't we simply sue the state to raise the money? And I don't think that that's an impossibility, and I think our esteemed lawyer here could tell us if we can do something like that. They should review how they came by the numbers. That's all I got to say about Cranberry. What I want to really talk about, I would like to make another comment about Cranberry that you may want to remember. I have 2 children. The youngest one graduated from Princeton High School in 1985. That's 33 years ago. For the last 33 years, 50% of my taxes go to the school, and I don't have children. The Cranberry pays tuition when a senior graduates. His parents don't keep paying tuition to Princeton. They pay it in Cranberry or something like that. We don't get the money. So we just keep paying more and more all the time. What I'd like to talk really about is the bond. And the bond bothers me quite a bit because the numbers on the bond don't seem to work out, at least in my opinion. According to Princeton Packet, there's going to be a tax increase of $295.15 in the year 2020, $294.15 in the year 2021, $692.51 in the year 22. I presume the packet got the numbers right because they quoted the board meeting. Question. Is that increase in tax include the interest on the bond, or does it include paying back the annual amortization of the bond?
Okay, I'll have to stop you because of your 3 minutes, but we can answer some of those questions if you'd like.
That's my first question, because...
But sorry, we only have 3 minutes per person to... 2 minutes per person to speak. I've already given you
We
three.
talk about $130 million. You got to give me a little more than 3 minutes.
I'll tell you what I'll do for you. We have...
You want to
I want to negotiate, yeah. So
that.
we have another public comment session after the budget, and this is more a budgetary bond type question, so I'd invite you to come back at our second public
I'll
comment.
just make one simple statement. Let's assume the first tranche, the 2020 tranche, is $30 million. The second one is $30 million, and the last one is $70 million, if I understand the numbers correctly. $30 million, I also assume, and I don't know, you will have to answer that, if this bond is a 10-year bond. You also have to answer whether the bond is going to be amortized annually or is going to be paid in a balloon at the end of year 10. I haven't heard about munis being paid in balloons. I heard munis being paid by amortization. $30 million divided by 10 is $3 million. There are 5,000 taxpayers in Princeton who pay school taxes. If you divide the $3 million into 5,000, that comes out to $600 per taxpayer. This number here is $295.15. You are short $305 in the taxes.
Okay, so let me stop you there, and maybe we can answer some of your questions. So thank you. And by the way, I'd like to thank you. I moved here in 2002, and really it was your taxes that built the schools that my kids went to. So I'd like to thank you for that, for your contribution to our town.
I'm paying the taxes because I have to.
Yeah, that's right. So am I. Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make, to me, there is something wrong here with the numbers.
Okay. Thank you. We'll get your questions answered.
One more thing I'd like to make.
I'm sorry, sir.
Can I make one more comment?
Can you wait until the next public comment session?
Not on the bond, because this...
But we're trying to keep it fair to everyone, and I'm sorry. I've given you a lot of time and much more than the children even that spoke. So I said you'll have another opportunity
this
later in the
comment
meeting.
is very serious comment.
I understand, but everybody needs to have a chance to speak, and those are the rules we adopted. So, Vic, maybe if you could clarify how the Cranberry funding formula works when there's a referendum and when bond interest, how bond interest is included in the Cranberry funding formula.
So, on a very high level, with regard to the issue with the per pupil, so the state has a calculation that takes into account a variety of factors that we're allowed to charge Cranberry for, right? So the interest or debt service, that's something that goes into that calculation. The actual cost of the capital construction does not. So to this gentleman's point with regard to funding and whether or not, that might involve some type of litigation with the state, all I can say about that without knowing what that likelihood of success would be is that there's been a lot of litigation over school funding for many, many years, probably for the last 40 or 50 years, frankly. And I couldn't begin to tell you whether or not that would have any chance of success. But the reality is that we don't have, within our power, the ability to change that. I mean, if the state changes how those costs are allocated to Cranberry, then that obviously would satisfy, obviously some people's concerns that Cranberry's not paying enough in that regard.
But just to be clear, if the interest on bond debt goes up, that goes into the Cranberry tuition.
My understanding is that's part of the per pupil calculation.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mic that. I should say it again. So if the interest, because of a bond referendum, goes up, then that is part of the Cranberry tuition, and therefore the Cranberry tuition should go up to reflect that.
Correct.
Okay. Your questions, Mr. Perry, about the bond and the payment of the bond, do you want to answer those now, Stephanie, or would you like to, you want to go, Greg?
If I could just make a very quick comment, and I want to echo what our president said, that it's thanks to you and to all the other residents of this community that we're in a position to even consider such a referendum. The bonds would be a 30-year bond, and the beauty of 30-year bonds is that it allows communities to consider what the needs are for the future generations. So we're building potentially, buildings that are going to be for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. And so you're right that there's a spike in the first few years and it goes back down because of the fact that we have a 30-year bond, but also because of the fact of the decisions that have been made by you, by our council over the last 10, 15, 20 years. We have the highest rating possible for Moody's. And so it allows us to finance at the lowest interest rate possible. And that's an opportunity. And it'll be up to you and all the other residents as to whether or not we proceed with the referendum. But it is thanks to everyone's sacrifice that we're even in a position to consider that.
But I think too, maybe for Stephanie, Mr. Perry was doing some kind of quick math on the number divided by the taxpayers, and you get to a number. Are there other factors that go into that calculation?
Yes, there certainly is, and it's our financial advisor's not here this evening, and they would have a lot more better way to explain it than I could. But it is not just a direct dollar in that sense.
I would just clarify the numbers that were that you quoted, the 295, 294, 692, and then dropping to 220 in year 4, and then going down from there. Number one, that's on the average assessed home of 837,000. So it could be higher or lower for individual taxpayers. It also is a calculation of the additional tax impact. So we have current debt already, which will retire in 2022 and 2023. And so that's why the number you're looking at is the additional tax impact, and then it drops off. It's not the number of taking 130 million and dividing it by 30 and then by the number of residents who pay taxes. So your calculation was off, and I'd be happy to talk to you offline about how to redo that formula.
Okay. So I know you, Charlotte, but if you could just identify yourself and again, 2 minutes, please, if you can.
Okay, Charlotte O'Connell, 116 Patton Avenue. My question is, and I'm coming back at the finance part for the budget, but so I'll use 1 minute now and 1 minute then. For Cranberry, what is their obligation for affordable housing? I was looking and I saw that you guys have been doing it. It's all been senior housing that I noticed, which was pretty smart. No school money needed to go toward that. But what's the affordable housing going forward, and how much? My projections from what I'm seeing show no increase in Cranberry students for 10 years. How can that be? That's my question. I'm saving my minute 33.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm not sure, maybe it's best for our demographer to answer that question, but unless you, Steve, have a...
Or unless Evelyn does. But I know the numbers decline, as you indicated in your presentation, from 70, 68 to down to 40, 37 per grade level. And I'm not sure how far out the demographer went.
But I think I've heard it from you, Charlotte, I've heard it at other board meetings too, questions people have is, wait a minute, there's a lot of land out there. Every time you drive by, there's new houses going up. How could it not be that also there'll be more high school students because of that? And I guess that's kind of the fundamental question is...
Well, there might be eventually, if we look 20 years down the road, and hopefully we'll have a high school with space to accommodate them when that happens.
Yeah. Okay.
Could I just, oh, sorry. Go ahead. Just on the topic, like a lot of students have brought up at this point, there are a lot of really tangible benefits that Cranberry students have brought to Princeton High School. And just to offer one, like in my government and politics class, the students are broken up. Like we have Princeton students and we have Cranberry students, and we have different like middle school backgrounds. And what that has allowed us to do is Cranberry students teach us when like JW or charter or another school like isn't able to provide like the same like we just learn different things at the different institutions, and we're able to teach each other from it. So I think it's really beneficial, and it's incredibly visible like in the classrooms, especially in discussions. And the second is like Cranberry has such an amazing performing arts department, and like our PHS band is amazing only because of like all the Cranberry students that contribute to it. So I think PHS would really be lacking without the Cranberry students, like aside from the finances.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, Charlotte, Jeanette, sorry, Jeanette, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Timmons, and I've been living in Princeton with my family for 9 years now. I have a son who is a sophomore in college and another son who, God willing, will graduate in June from Princeton High School and move on to college. And so we will be empty nesters, and as is the topic amongst many new empty nesters, veteran empty nesters, is the question of, are we going to stay in Princeton? And we say absolutely yes. The schools were a big reason that we moved to Princeton with the school district, and just because we are done educating our children here doesn't mean that we are now going to vote with our feet and lose and move. I feel that we are part of a community, and part of our community obligation is to educate all the children. Besides from a community benefit, there's obviously a financial benefit. The better the schools, the higher my property will be valued when we do eventually move, maybe 20, 30 years down the road. But I feel that we are educating our future doctors, lawyers, plumbers, electricians, artists, and perhaps these are people who will be my plumber one day or my doctor one day. And I take that obligation very seriously, that we are all part of one community. I would encourage Evelyn Spahn to please encourage Cranberry parents to come to these Board of Ed meetings and to PTO meetings. I try to come to as many meetings as I can as an interested parent, and plan to come in the future as an interested taxpayer to support our schools. And I think Cranberry absolutely is a part of our community, but we need to hear more Cranberry voices. Please, please encourage parents to come to board meetings and to come to Princeton High School PTO meetings and have their voices heard.
Do you know who the president of the Princeton PTO is?
Susan Cantor.
Susan Cantor and Shazia Menikar.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Beth and Greg, question about the financial impact. When you did your analysis, after 4 years, it was about a $2.8 million loss in the annual operating budget. Was that correct? All right. So, and that was a 25%, assuming a 25% direct savings, and then the indirect costs would be the 2.8 million. So if I don't know if you did this calculation. I'm trying to ensure that we're being good stewards of public funds and looking long term. So if we look at that annual loss over the course of 30 years, I'm not doing the math really quickly in my head, but I think that would be about $84 million, 30 times 2.8. And the cost of the high school, just by comparison, is $56 million. So we would actually be losing $84 million in revenue over that 30-year period. So I just But I just want to make sure my calculations are correct.
Yeah, that aligns with our calculations. And on top of that, that also underscores the fact that the Cranberry tuition is the second largest source of revenue. And so there was a question before about what's the difference between a Cranberry student financially and a Princeton student. And the fact is that every Cranberry student pays $17,000. So each additional one brings $17,000 more in revenue. If you substitute with a Princeton student, you don't have that source of revenue. So you lose your second largest source of revenue that we have right now at a time when we're financially strapped, as you'll be hearing in the discussion on the budget.
And I actually think, looking at these numbers today, I'm learning this all with all of you because I'm new to the board, and I have to say I indeed didn't know how this all worked until I got here. We're campaigning and we're trying to talk about the Cranberry Agreement, and I was trying to understand it. And I feel like it's taken me hours and hours of thinking about this and I'm not always a numbers person, so. But yeah, I mean, the fact that the Cranberry numbers are going down significantly in the next few years and we are completely strapped on the budget, I am actually concerned because I think that we're going to have some issues on our annual budgets in the next couple of years because that number is going to go down. So yeah, and absolutely, I mean, you can project forward, Steve. I don't know exactly what the number is. Again, we can disagree with what the indirect costs are, but there's definitely a proportion that is indirect. Even if it's just $1 million, that's $30 million over the next 30 years that we would forego.
Okay, we are going to go over our budget, so we do have kind of a long agenda, as it seems to be usual these days. But unless there's any other questions or comments at this time, we will have another public comment at item K after the budget presentation. So,
Pat, just while we're dissolving, I know that he had a question about the tuition and the referendum. I believe he had and you were trying to get to that answer. Included in the Cranberry tuition rate is the interest on any outstanding debt for the high school. And as per the state regulation, Cranberry tuition rate will include payments towards the interest on the referendum debt. Just because we're clearing things up, it's probably good
thank
to
you
keep
for
that
clarifying
information out
that.
there. I know there's a lot.
Okay. Can I ask a quick question about as we mentioned before, since Cranberry, the tuition that Cranberry pays per student is a significant part of our revenue, but how much is that revenue expected to go down with the decline of Cranberry students that we're expecting?
Well, it will go down by 17,121 per
student,
head that we don't have. So I don't know exactly what the number will be, but if next year is like 48 students, I don't know the exact numbers. You have to just do the math, but
I think 4 years out you had 220, and we're at 270, 68 at this point. So, right, yeah,
it does become meaningful.
So 40 students by 17.
Okay, so it looks like we have one more commenter for this segment. Can you? I don't know if you signed up on the list or not. Okay, so it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. Just if you can limit it to 2 minutes, and then
I'll give you 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Brian Tempowski, also a Princeton resident. So just out of curiosity, send and receive prior to high school, was that ever looked at? Is that something that possibly could be looked at? You guys can, form on this.
I think the answer
it's a larger.
Yeah. The answer there is it's sort of a Cranberry question, and they do operate a public school for K through 8 there.
Right.
And so, I believe it's something that if they wanted to stop operating a school, they could certainly enter into a send receive, but I don't think anyone's discussed that as being on the table.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, if we can then, we'll be moving on to item G, which is the superintendent report, which usually happens in the first 5 minutes of any meeting.
All right.
So
good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the excellent presentation. So 5 years ago, when I was young and naive and still an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, I used to look at superintendents and say, those poor people, all they deal with is buildings and budgets and problems, and not with teaching and learning and kids. And 5 years later, a little bit older, maybe a little bit wiser. I still occasionally deal with problems, but I have come to see that that buildings and budgets are fundamental to teaching and learning, and that and really essential to the quality of the experience that our kids have in our schools. So tonight we're going to be talking about budget. That's the primary focus for this agenda. But before we do, I kind of want to focus us quickly on the students, the staff, and the reasons that our schools are really so amazing here in this community. And I want to do that by looking at a slice of a Saturday here in Princeton, very quickly. So this past Saturday, 10 o'clock, Riverside Elementary School. We begin our first celebration of Bill Cerullo. There were wonderful speeches by his wife Susan, by his friends, his colleagues, teachers. The words made us laugh, they made us cry, and they really reminded us of the life and the legacy of this man who had such an impact on so many generations of students here in Princeton. We unveiled a new river bear out in front of the school. You can actually turn that back on. I'm afraid they'll fall asleep at this hour if the lights are off. We unveiled the new river bear that was lovingly painted by the students, and they put some of their favorite phrases on it that reminded them of Bill. We also unveiled a new street sign that marked the sort of that circular driveway in front of the school as William D. Cerullo Way, also known as Bill's Way. And Bill usually got his way, even with me. And for me, Bill's Way was always the way of child-centeredness. So I thought it was important that we mention that tonight, particularly as we're talking so much about the investment in our kids through the referendum, through the budget. So yes, Bill was incredibly child-centered. He probably would have loved the fact that we concluded that celebration with a bike ride wearing crazy socks through town with a police escort. So it was a great day. We have other activities planned. I think we're looking at completely redoing the courtyard at Riverside in Bill's honor, and then the public will hear more about that. Over at JW, that same Saturday morning, we had Race to Serve. So this is, I think it's loosely based on the Amazing Race concept. We had 72 students, staff, parents who all came together, and they were assigned to different groups. They didn't know who they were going to be with, and they were given envelopes. And they opened up the envelope, and they had 8 different service projects in which they could engage. So I have a couple of them here. We had the Princeton Family YMCA, where they were painting their outside playground furniture, Princeton Public Library, where they created a display and writing and reading aloud poetry for Poetry Month, stream cleanup at the watershed, habitat restoration and trail clearing with Friends of Princeton Open Space. They went to Homefront. They did warehouse inventory and made welcome home cards. Went to Johnson Park Elementary and helped to beautify the grounds there. Arm in Arm, they prepared snack bags, over 100. And then the Trenton Area Soup Kitchen, where they baked and packaged cookie bags and decorated and filled lunch bags. So the goal was just to give our students a sense of what it was like to give back to the community and to pull our community together. And I'm just very proud of the effort. Monique Jones was the staff member who led that, and I'm grateful to all the students and parents and staff who participated. And then, of course, Saturday night, we had the Jazz Festival at the high school. So this was a continuation of all the fun on Friday night, where the middle school bands were playing. Saturday, we had our visiting artist, Tony Sukar is a Peruvian producer and percussionist. So he he did a clinic for our kids, and then we had high school bands from area high schools who all played. So it was an evening of learning and listening and performing and playing and fun for our students, and it's one more thing that just makes this really a remarkable school and community. And it's why you're all here tonight. It's why the board is here. It's why we're going to be now talking about the budget. So every year, I always say the same line. I say numbers tell a story. And this year the story is it was one of austerity. The budget was tight, as you'll see, and Stephanie will go over that shortly. Despite growing enrollment, there were absolutely no new staff added to the budget. School budgets remained flat almost exclusively. We met our contractual obligations to pay salaries. We had an expansion at the charter school. Obviously, we had to pay for that. But we did strive to invest where it matters. So I'm grateful that we were able to add a little bit of funding, Annie, to your budget for curriculum instruction, particularly for professional development. As this community knows, we're focused on problem-based learning for our staff. We're focused on issues of culturally responsive teaching and curriculum writing and revision. And so those are the things that we really do want to invest in. We started last year for the first time a summer institute for professional development. It was very, very successful. We hope that expands this year. And so we wanted to be able to invest in our staff, which is the best way to invest in our students. And we also found a way, thanks to our transportation coordinator, to add the funding and the busing needed for a later start time at the high school. It seems like a long time that we made that move, but it was a really important one, and she was able to add the busing and reduce costs in other areas, so that you won't see that in the transportation increase because it's flat, but it's there, and I wanted to point that out. We are trying in our budget to maintain our focus on our strategic goals of wellness and balance for students, of every child known, of closing the achievement gap, of innovation in teaching and learning, and of communication, connection, and care. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie. The real story of the budget is how hard our business administrator worked to make it balance. So she's going to walk us through the numbers, but let's make sure we're keeping the kids in mind as we go through this process.
So good evening, everybody. As Steve mentioned, Superintendent Cochran mentioned, the budget is very tight, and as I shared with the administration during an administration meeting, I know they hear me say that every year and they think I'm a broken record, but this year the record broke in a lot of pieces because it was even tighter yet. I'm gonna make sure how this goes. Okay. Real quickly, our budget priorities remain the same from year to year. We've maintained focus on teaching, learning, and student achievement. We support the district vision, strategic planning. I won't read through all this, but this presentation is on board docs. You'll be able to find it there as well. But we have a set of budget priorities which we've been working using the same priorities for the last couple of years because the priorities remain unchanged.
Good.
Okay, so real quick, our budget process, we started off long before our budget workshops. We actually began gathering budget detail from our budget managers prior to the first of the year. They're sent out budget development packages, and they're to get them to my office by January. We work through those. We analyze where people are attempting to increase, generally for good reasons. We put it all in the beginning, and then we start realizing that we can't cover all of the requests, and we start making changes. We had two public board budget workshops on March 6th and 13th, and then a tentative budget March 20th. From the March 20th tentative budget to today, the budget has not changed. We were not able to add any money, and we did not decrease any money. Okay, table of contents, this is what we're going to go over. The expense, we're going to look at enrollment real quick, reductions made during the whole budget process. The general fund expenses, which is a lot of detail, and if you're interested, again, it's up on the website. I won't go through each and every one of them. I'll explain capital reserve, long-term debt, and then we'll look at the revenues. So enrollment, as we talk about every month and every meeting about how the enrollment's growing. This is the current year versus the projection based on the demographic information that we have been given out to 2021. And these numbers are based on the October counts. That's when the state requires us to take physical count of the enrollment, and that's what our state aid is based on, those numbers. Okay. So the reductions that were made from I guess the second round. We made first round, we didn't even really discuss those. We just made a lot of cuts from original requests. We were then short a large amount, about 1.3 million. And out of proposed from all of the budget managers, we were 1.3 million over the revenues that we were able to include. So, of course, we always look at health benefits. We took those down early on. We reduced some staffing, non-instructional, and we'll do that through attrition, curriculum and instruction. We made some cuts there, even though there's a little bit more. We cut back on what was originally budgeted. We flatlined the school budgets. We reduced the maintenance work by a lot, which is unfortunate. It's just that maintenance projects won't get done. We adjusted for retirements. Every retirement that is known during the budget process is their retiring salary is adjusted down to a new starting teacher salary. And then we had after we did those cuts, we still had those cuts on that side. We cut over $900,000 on the left-hand side. After those cuts, and as we worked through the budget, we still were short over $400,000. And then we had some increases after our March 6th meeting. We had a charter school adjustment. I had just underestimated what that would be. Miscellaneous changes. And then how to balance the budget, we reduced additional money from health benefits. That is one of the tightest categories that we are budgeting. But we also, fortunately, gained $524,000 additional in state aid. And I see my letter was chopped off there. So we had a net revenue of $624, and we had additional increases of $624, bringing our general fund budget in balance at $9,253. Okay, this is the detail. It's all there. Anybody is welcome to look at it online. It is about as detailed as you're going to get. It's each and every line, but you can go through and see. There's very little increase. There's increases in the areas where it's needed. Student services, we have special education that we have to finance, and we're going to, and we have to. Human resources just has a little bit, board office a little bit, curriculum. In that increase is professional development, along with some books, I believe it was. As you can see, the schools are all flat. That's not what they requested. That's what they're getting, unfortunately. The high school has a little bit of an increase, and that's minimal based on the increase in the enrollment. Next page, athletics. Over the last couple of years, we've been trying to capture the true cost of running the athletic programs that we have. So last year, we funded extra money into the athletics. Again, this year, we are, again, in an effort to make sure that the board is paying for all of the athletics and not the booster clubs. Booster clubs should be paying for the icing, and we should be paying for the cake. The biggest cost of that is the transportation. Although our transportation director will be having our staff transport as much as they can. There's still some contracted transportation that is required from outside companies, and part of that increase is based on the transportation of getting the sports teams to where they have to go. Maintenance, you'll see, is actually decreased. It was actually requests to be more than the prior year, but we cut out a lot of projects. Technology, also. Transportation, as Superintendent Cochran mentioned, is flat. That doesn't really tell the story. Doesn't tell the story about how our transportation increased due to the change in the time. Yet our transportation director is managing our transportation department so well and reviewing each and every route and saving money so that in the end, there's no increase in there. Yet yeah. I wish Donna was here to hear that. Her name is Donna Braden, and no other school district can have her. Charter school was their second year of their enrollment increase. We're at the 422. That's with the state, and the charter school informs the state how many students they anticipate. 422 is what we have to budget for. It's an additional 475 for this year. Health benefits is the category that we should be increasing more than 98%. 98,000. Sorry, 98%. Yeah, less than 1%. That's really tight. So I don't know. I'm sure what we're going to do there. A New Jersey debt payment is a payment that is actually related to the 2001 bond referendum, which after the state released grants to support those projects way back then, they initiated a payment due unbeknownst to the district. It is actually part of our operating expense. It's been there for years, so it's just another line item. But if we didn't have to pay it, we would be able to put the 239 towards some other expense in our budget. I said I wasn't going to read all of these, and here I am reading them all. And a new line item is lease trailer admin space. That means administration space for the high school staff that have moved out of the building into trailers. Very nice trailers, but trailers. And we're renting those units. So for it's an annual cost of $50,000 to rent what is currently there. Utilities, again, should not be flat. It is, because we had no other choice. I try to budget everything as tight as possible. That's another really tight number that worries me a little bit. Okay. Salaries. Salaries are contractual. Please don't let the percentage on the end make you believe that anyone is getting 4.83% increase. That's not the case. It's just the matter of how the numbers fall out. If we, during the current year, we had increased some staff, so they're partially funded in the 1 year and fully funded in the year going forward. So that's why you see 4%. The salaries overall are going up about 4%, but that's not individual persons' increases. General operating budget, $90,145,000. The capital reserve is interest income on our capital reserve account. It's a category we have to identify. Capital reserve, there's another slide about capital reserve. I'll explain that. So our general operating total budget is $90,253,000. Again, all of this PowerPoint's up on the website. So here's the breakdown of the budget in the short form. I guess I could have jumped right to this, and the percent of the budget. So all salaries and benefits make up 69% of our budget. Non-discretionary are utilities and other. We have to pay some pension. We have there's a whole category of them that was. I think I presented up above. If we go back. Non-discretionary is all listed there. Charter school, health benefits. Well, health benefits I pulled out on the next slide, but all the rest of them, that's what makes up the non-discretionary.
If I could just point something out. Can you go back to the previous slide? one more. I was looking for student services.
Oops.
Yeah. So that is not included in the non-discretionary? That
No.
fund? But it really isn't discretionary, right?
It's not discretionary.
Right.
No,
Right.
no.
Right. But-
No, it's not, but I'm talking about.
No, but, no, I know that you're doing it how you're supposed to, but I just wanted to point out, for the public, could you go back to so there's $5.3 million, and if you go to the end.
Where do you want me to?
Where you had the non-discretionary, right there, it's really closer to 19 million.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I mean, we could really say that about all the categories. We have to have some expenses.
Right.
So.
But I mean, you don't have a choice. It's almost as like the charter school payment. You don't have a choice. We don't have a choice.
Oh, correct. Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so now, and then all the schools and department budgets. So out of our 90 million, it's only 13 million of disposable income. We could put it that way, which really isn't, but that's, the schools can buy their pencils and pens and their crayons and their paper, and then, of course, different books and things for the different levels. So capital reserve is actually withdrawal of 100,000. We have to, the 875.50 is the interest income. We have to account for that. It's an accounting thing, but to make the budget balance, I have to represent it so people understand why it's in balance. Capital reserve. So when the maintenance department put together their budget, they had a lot of maintenance items that were included that we had to pull back. What one of them, two of them, were for some roof repairs for Princeton High School and Witherspoon, because they need to be repaired. Some of the other maintenance we can just put off, but the roofs we need to address. We put it into capital reserve. Capital reserve are funds we already have, so it's just allotting the money that we use as a savings account for capital improvement at some time in the future. So we're reducing that by 100,000 to address those two items. Okay, and here's your pie. Yes, so this is just a demonstration of where our costs are. 57% is salaries, but the other health benefits is up there somewhere is another 12, so it's 69 in salary and benefits. Our next largest category would be that's health benefits, would be charter school. And non-discretionary is that grouping of a bunch of different things. Maintenance is 1%. Maintenance media, technology, and security is 1%. Athletics, 1%. Middle school budgets, that's their the budgets that the principals have to use, 1%. Elementary is 1% total. And then student services, all of student services, including special education, is about 6%. Maintenance, transportation, 4% there. Okay, so that's our pie. Long-term debt. Our long-term debt, I thought it was important to be a little bit more descriptive on this year instead of a lump number. 2001, we're still paying on our 2001. That is the bond proceeds the bonds will mature in 2022. Currently, we pay $3.8 million in principal, and then interest you can see. Of course, over the 20 years, this particular bond was 20 years. Principal was lower in the beginning, interest higher, and just like a home mortgage, it reverses, and we're paying mostly principal at this point on both of those bond issuances. 2013, it was from the referendum of 2012, but we bonded in 2013. We pay annually $1 million plus the interest. Same thing with the offered on. That particular bond was only for 10 years because the original amount was only 11. And the projects that we did in there did not warrant going out to a 20-year payback. They were mostly maintenance items. Principal and interest, we have to budget the full amount as an expense, $5.7 million. We do have two offsets. We offset every year interest earned, and when new bonds are issued and you're holding a larger sum of money in the bank, we're making interest on that, and each year of the following year, we reduce the amount of debt that the community is responsible for paying with the offset of interest income. The amount budgeted there is a legal settlement relating to capital projects that we had got. We're allowed to expend that over 5 years as opposed to adding it all in 1 year and dropping down the tax levy and then bumping it up again the following year. So we spread it over 5. This is the 4th year, and then there'll be a piece. It won't be 574. It might be 350 or 400,000 that we'll be able to offset debt for 2019, 2020. Wow. So the tax levy portion for debt is 5.1 as opposed to the expense that we will pay out is 5.7 because we already have 6 of it. Okay, revenues. This is short. We don't get many. The largest, of course, is tax levy, 84% of our total general fund levy, or revenues, excuse me. Cranberry tuition is our second largest revenue stream at 5.5. State aid inched up this year, so it's actually 5.3, where it's been less than that. If I remember back a slide, we picked up about over 500,000 new aid for next year. Fund balance is funds that we take from the operating margin from the current year that we anticipate, and we carry that forward to the next year, plus any funds that are over our 2% that we're allowed to keep in fund balance, basically savings account. We cannot save more than 2%. Part of the reason why school districts continue to go, or are starting to go to referendum now, is because in the past we were able to save more money and you could move that into capital reserve and do projects. We have a limit on what we can have as a savings account, which is 2% of the prior year's budget. So it's not even current year, it's prior year. And then we have an excess surplus. It sounds like we have surplus, but it's anything above that 2% we're required to reinvest into the upcoming budget. There's our cap reserve. That's money we already have. And then again, so you'll see the revenues balance with the expenses, which we're required to do. Okay, there's our pie. Tax levy being the largest. The square off to the side is a blow up of that little brown section, which is the other revenue. And that's a combination of capital reserve amounts and the miscellaneous revenues that we have, and a little section of Medicaid semi, which we actually year after year don't even get that amount. We always get less than what the state requires us to budget. Next slide is a picture of the non-tax revenues. So all of these are the revenues except for tax levy that supports the budget. And again, there's just a little pullout of what that smallest piece is. Tax levy, again, for your reading pleasure later, how it's made up. A school budget is based on a calendar year of July to June. Tax levy is based on a calendar year of January to December. So what that happens is that the taxing for the current year is a split, and it takes half the prior year budget and half of the current year budget. So this is a demonstration of what the taxes will be for 2018 when your tax bills come out. I'm not a tax expert. These are my estimates, but they're usually pretty good on the mark. And this is also what I report out to the, I have to report out to the town, the annual tax that supports the annual school budget, July to June. And then the town develops the tax. This is just an estimate for folks. Tax impact, again, an estimate. my estimate, the average tax, the average increase on the, let me try this again. The estimated increase on the average assessed home valued at $837,000 will be $159 for the whole year. That's for the 12-month period. And then you can see the other amounts. Another way to look at it is for every $100, it's $1.12 of your estimated value. This is the breakdown of the cap waiver. We had a cap waiver, Daphne had mentioned, from prior years when we got our first adjustment, ability to raise taxes based on our enrollment increases. It came to us at last, and we weren't later in the budget process, and we did not just throw it into the tax levy. We wanted to make sure we used it appropriately, so we spread it out over a couple years. The balance of it is $620, which we need to balance the budget for 18-19. Okay, and then this is our mission in motion. And it's just some. There we go.
Okay, well, I'd just like to thank you, Stephanie, for all your work on this. Every year, we always have a budget workshop in the spring, and usually it's a bleak session because we're looking at how to close a gap, and it's hard to, as you can see from those numbers, the pies. I particularly like the pies because it shows that salary and benefits are over 60% of our costs, and a lot of our other costs are almost 70, and so a lot of our other costs are fixed. So when you're talking about cutting an operating budget, you're talking about cutting people, and the schools are a people business. It's done by, it's not something that leverages like a technology company would. It needs people, really good people, which we have. So when we're talking about cutting, like we were tonight, it's really the people that we would be cutting if we were cutting operating expense. So I'm really proud as a board member to stand behind this budget. I'm sad that we can't do more in terms of getting good people to teach our kids. We had a big payment to the charter school this year that took a lot of, that was something that took up a lot of our town's resources. But it's another nice job, and we appreciate all the hard work you do on making sure that the school is appropriately financed. So I wanted to thank you for that.
You say that in a few months.
Sure.
You mentioned there was, 500,000 of new state aid?
525,000.
Yes.
Yeah. So how did you get that?
I didn't get it. They just gave it to us. The state this year, the state funding plan, the way schools are funded, there's a formula, yet another formula, and schools have been underfunded,
Correct.
and the formula has not been applied as it's set up for years. So this year, the governor made the decision to partially fund it, and so our share was $524,000, which we happily accepted.
I have one quick question about the trailers for the high school. It was 100% increase. Is that because it was a capital expense last year?
It was
When
not an expense. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay.
Last year, we had a capital reserve. I'm sorry. Last year was a capital reserve item because we were installing them. And as we were able to fund the balance of the year with the leases with that money, after that, it has to become a regular operating item. That's why it shows as new this year.
The rental.
Yeah, it's the rental of.
Thank you. And just, I know many of us have noted this, but the fact that our K through 8 principals, have kept their budget flat, have had to keep their budget flat. That is not what they asked for. Think about what comes out of a principal's budget. It's field trips, it's supplies, there's all kinds of things. So I'm sure they're being very creative about ways to to spend another year at this level, but I just want to thank them for that. And again, Stephanie, thank you very much for all your work.
Okay, if there's no more questions or comments, then we need a motion to. Oh, public hearing. Okay, sorry. So we'll let you take it. Okay. So how does?
Anybody that wants to speak about the budget only.
Okay.
During this period. This budget.
So just to clarify, in terms of topics on the table for the public hearing, it is the budget, the numbers that you put on the board. If it's something about charter school in general or referendum in general, that could be item K, which is coming up after the board reports. But this is just on the specific report that you just gave. So
And
just
this
to be
is a
clear.
requirement by the state that you have to have a public hearing just on the budget.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Julia Rubin. I live at 360 Jefferson Road. I just wanted to thank Stephanie. I know how difficult that was, and Steve. Two things. One is you did not make a mistake on the charter funding. You actually did it perfectly. The state changed the formula, and so they're getting more funding than they did over the last 2 years. And the second thing is, unfortunately, that $500,000 includes adjustment aid, and as I'm sure you know from following what's going on, that may not be around much longer. So hopefully we'll get another quarter of the difference between what we're getting and what we're supposed to get under the formula, and it'll offset some of that. But yeah, good news, bad news. But you did not make a mistake, so thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Rosenfeld.
Hi, David Rosenfeld, school psychologist at the high school. I've become a bit of a board meeting junkie. I'm going to admit it.
You had to confess that,
I don't
David.
watch Real Housewives anymore. I watch you guys. And I'm just owning it, you know?
Yeah.
But I wanted to double check. I got nervous in March because there were 2 interns who were going to be cut out of the budget, and I wanted to make sure they're back in.
The 50,000, yeah. No.
In that case, I want to go on record to state my grave concern here that we are cutting back on mental health services at the high school, following 2 suicides at the high school in the past 2 years. The interns who work at the high school are certified school psychologists who work there full time. They are a bargain. They are the reason that we're able to handle the significant needs at the high school. And I don't know how we as a staff will be able to.
Dr. Rosenfeld, Mickey fought hard for that. She actually went back to her budget and reworked it so that I believe that could be a priority, because as you point out, these are full-time psychologists who are working with us, and we pay Rutgers, I think, $25,000
per person. Yeah.
Per person. It is probably the best money we spend. We get a lot for it, and so I know that it was a high priority for Mickey Crisafulli, and she went back and reworked her budget so that they could.
I just want to make sure
be in.
before you do any
Yeah.
final approval that's we've already identified 2
I know
excellent
she did.
candidates for
Yeah.
next year, and we won't be able to manage without those supports. So, yeah. I also just wanted to mention too, when we talk about the need to expand the high school, I'm really excited. I want to say thank you for all the great work you guys are doing. You certainly have a big supporter in the later start time for the high school. The research is clear. And I'm really appreciative of all the work that you guys are doing around the high school. It's shocking to me that anyone would have questions about whether we need to expand the high school. To me, it's all very connected to the different components of our strategic plan. And I want to just remind people, I've been at the high school 8 years. We have a number of classrooms. When we say we have kids, we have space for kids, we're talking, some of these rooms are closets with literally no windows. And the students who are educated in those spaces are special education students often, or ELL students. And when you're talking about special education students, we're sometimes talking about kids with ADHD or anxiety. We're putting them in rooms with no windows, with poor air conditioning. To me, it makes me think of separate but not equal. We need to do this, and we need to figure out how to make this happen. So thank you again for your hard work, and again, please, I'm going to have a panic attack if we can't keep those interns.
Can't have that. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Rosenfeld.
David, I just wanted to say thank you for advocating for the children. It's not easy to come up here to your boss's boss's boss and ask for something in front of the entire community. I appreciate it and keep doing it. Thank you.
And I'm really thankful to Mickey, too, because I know she's been working.
Yeah.
It was a snow day. I was at home watching the board meeting, and I was like, oh, my God. I was like, Mickey. So, thank you.
Thanks, David. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pamela Adler, and I'm a Princeton resident. I have a budget impact question on the charter is the second largest expense right now that we have, and I was wondering if we're pursuing litigation to try to fix this problem. Thank you.
I can just say at a very high level, we are pursuing litigation. We had from the beginning, we have 2 lawsuits that are currently still working their way through the system. One, they're both appeals at this point. The first alleged that the charter school didn't follow the rules of the Open Public Meetings Act when they declared their meeting and ultimately voted for expansion because they didn't notify the community. We lost on the first round, but we're appealing that now. And then a second appeal of the Christie administration's Commissioner of Education who approved the expansion without clarifying her reasons for doing so. And so we're continuing, at least as of now, we are continuing those appeals. Sure.
Charlotte O'Connell, 116 Patton. 1 minute and 33 seconds.
You got it. Okay.
Hopefully I'll make it in that, but I don't think so because this is more. First, I would like to ask the audience to stop clapping for whether you agree or disagree. It's really kind of a painful thing. If you don't like Trump, you don't like it when you hear people wearing, let's make America great again. So I would really appreciate if the audience would stop the clapping on the different topics. Just because I'm concerned about paying a month of my salary in taxes does not mean that I don't support the public schools. I do. And I think you guys know it because I'm up here talking about it. I think you know my concerns with the taxes, and I appreciate all the work that you do. And I really want to say, because I know all I do is carp, but I really appreciate every single one of you, the work that you do. I really do, because you're here so many more nights than just what we see on the TV or in other meetings. And I really know that, and I really appreciate it. It doesn't go unnoticed with me. For the research that I do, trying to find out what's going on. I know you guys are doing it all in the background way ahead of me. I do understand that. It's just like, what does that mean, though? So my things about the budget are, I know you've got the commitments with the teachers and the benefits and all of that. To the psychologist comments, I would ask you to stop really great field trips in order to have those interns. I know you've said that that's not the issue, but when you have to make choices on stuff, overnight field trips out of state, for me, that doesn't look like a marker. The kids can learn a lot of stuff within New Jersey. We have everything available. And so when I see something on the field trips, I just kind of ran through that and went, what are they doing overnight field trips someplace? So that was one of the things I thought, okay, these are little things, but the phys ed stuff, the athletics, I'm an athlete, doesn't look like it now, but I was an athlete, and I really appreciate that program. And the book Spark really made me see that you've got to have kids out being active. But when we're spending a lot of money on that athletics budget, and I hate to say take anything like that out of the budget, but there are a lot of things and I know you're looking at it, and I know, Stephanie, you are going through the whole thing, and I really appreciate it. I said it last year, and I'll say it again this year. You do a phenomenal job with these numbers, and you deserve the clapping. And the transportation person deserves the clapping. So, the one other thing I'd like to say is please stop talking about the charter school and how much it costs us. They're our kids. You know what? They're our kids. They go at 90% of the cost. Okay, so what, is it 100% now? Okay, so they go for 100%. But you know what? They're our kids. So I think we just need to quit talking about charter like they're the enemy. It's our town. Thanks for all your work.
Thank you. Okay, as I said, we have one more public comment session for sort of broad agenda matters. Yeah. Oh, but yeah, you're welcome if you want to come and talk about budget. Yeah, absolutely welcome.
Hi, Wendy Wilton. I'm in Riverside. I do have a question. Obviously, the biggest part of the pie that was kind of, I know it's kind of like a black box, is the salaries. And there are a lot of details about some of the, down to nitty-gritty, 10,000 here, 12,000 here. Is there any type of analysis or audit that's done in terms of salaries, number of positions? Because, again, that's our biggest number. Thank you. More of a question.
Lou, I don't know if you wanted to jump in. I'm not sure, Wendy, exactly what you're asking in terms of audit. We do have very clear breakdown of the staff. We have about 800 staff, and the number who are teachers and members of PREA, the numbers who are support staff, administrators. I don't have that at my fingertips. Lou probably has it at the tip of his tongue. Is that what you were looking for? Was just the breakdown of employee positions? Or the actual contractual rates of the increases?
I guess, in terms, I know that the contracts have all been approved again going forward,
Yep.
so we don't have to go through what we went through a couple years ago, which is great. But is it more than a rubber stamp that we say, this salaries here, pass it to the next year at some level of increase? Is there any analysis that's done? And no, I do not want to see programs cut, but push comes to shove, we start losing Cranberry, who's really funding a lot of our budget, which is a whole other question I'll address later. But if we had to do something, where is there flexibility in there? Do we know where that might be?
We do that all the time.
Okay.
All the time. We're looking at how we can streamline our delivery of services, where we can make cuts if need be. Yeah.
It's not the fun
It's not,
topic of
no.
conversation, though.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Stephanie, so are we now at a point where we can do a motion and a vote, or is there anything else in our public hearing that we need to do before then? Okay. And this is an action item, and it's only I-1, is that correct? Okay. Consent. So can I have a motion for item I-1, which is the 2018-19 budget? Debbie, thank you. And a second? Jess? Yeah, I think we're good. Yeah, right.
Motion passes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. No clapping. Just kidding. It's okay to clap. So with that, we'll move on to our board committee reports, and we'll start with our student board members, Amy Wang and Brian Liu.
Thank you. So this month we surveyed students on the upcoming facility changes that are being considered at the high school. We looked at and broke down different components of the changes that are being proposed and asked students to gauge how important they are to them. on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 representing that the change is not particularly important to students, and 5 representing that the change is very important. So our survey encompassed a total of 491 student responses who answered questions in homeroom or by voluntarily submitting a response online. After averaging out the data, we calculated the mean score of importance given to various components of the referendum. They are, in descending order of importance, 4.18 for HVAC, 3.14 for increased school security, 3.07 for collaborative learning spaces, 2.94 for smaller classrooms, 2.85 for field and athletic improvements, 2.83 for coffee bar, which we believe can be grouped more largely with the grab-and-go serveries and concession stands. So it's really clear to us that students are prioritizing HVAC improvements, increased school security, and collaborative learning spaces among the many changes that are being considered in the referendum. The most notable result was that students are strongly concerned about the heating and ventilation changes, with 91% of students giving it a score of 3 or higher. On the topic of basic needs like heating, we also wanted to bring up the mouse problem at the high school. In fact, last morning there had been a mouse in the bookshelves of the PHS Learning Commons, which isn't an uncommon occurrence, it turns out. And after talking to a teacher about it, she said that many other teachers have reported the issue in their classrooms as well. So with school facilities at the forefront, we wanted to mention this to illustrate the condition of the high school as it is right now. So other proposed changes for the referendum appear to be of relative unimportance, such as the coffee bar and the field and athletic improvements. Based on the data, the grab-and-go serveries and concessions are not a priority for students and can be something that is adjusted for future proposals for the referendum to cut down costs. In regards to field and athletic improvements, there was a really large standard deviation, which suggests that athletes value the changes a lot more naturally compared to students who don't play sports. Likewise, the standard deviation was also notably higher for students regarding the coffee bar and serveries, suggesting that while some would greatly appreciate it, others find it unimportant.
So, yeah. So we also surveyed students on how crowded they feel various areas of Princeton High School are. So once again, using basically the same format, students had the chance to rank how crowded various segments of the school are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being not particularly crowded and 5 being very crowded. After averaging out the data, we found out that the mean score given to various areas at PHSR, beginning of the most crowded, a 4.32 for the hallways, a 3.88 for the cafeteria, 3.81 for stairwells, and 3.15 for classrooms. From the survey, the need to expand the school is very clear, and most students feel strongly about how overcrowded these areas are. In terms of specific areas, the priorities definitely lie with the hallways and cafeteria, and we hope that the referendum can effectively address that. In regards to the cafeteria specifically, students cited not always eating there, and not many, very few students, if I had to make an estimate, probably around 10% of the school, actually consistently eat there due to the lack of space in the cafeteria. And that buying lunch within the lunch lines of the cafeteria, which is far more common, like many students buy lunch in the cafeteria but then eat it elsewhere, that has posed a problem because many students have complained in previous surveys about how buying lunch in the cafeteria and eating it within the allotted time of break takes a bit too long. So finally, we also wanted to bring up some qualitative, we also had an area at the end of our survey where students could just share their own thoughts, like a little open-ended section. So we like to share some of the things that students had to say. So one student surveyed wrote that every time they walk down the hallway, they feel like a rat in an overcrowded cage. Coincidentally, there are literally kids walking on top of each other. Another wrote that expansion seems to be especially necessary and asked us to not forget that teachers had to physically move out of the school to make space, which is something, as we are very familiar with, happened last year. And another said, I don't want to go to school in a prison regarding the new security measures, and please do not add metal detectors or armed security personnel with firearms, and the student would instead prefer solutions like locked doors and cameras to increase safety without oppressive security. A few students also suggested using a system where students can swipe into the school with their ID, potentially their student IDs, and also putting in their student ID number to make it easier for them to get into the school while having only 2 open entrances during the day in order to mitigate some of the inconveniences posed by the new policy. And lastly, students also cited wanting to have gender-neutral bathrooms, and other students brought up the issue of the lack of space for clubs to meet, especially in the STEM area, like in the science like in the science rooms particularly, which require workshops and space to house and build long-term projects for clubs like Science Olympiad, Odyssey of the Mind, etc. And we hope this information is helpful to the board, and we will continue to share resources to educate students on changes happening with the referendum for them to form more informed opinions. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian and Amy.
Can you send us that report if you haven't already? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Very done, very well done.
Okay, now we'll turn to the other committee reports, starting with facilities with Chair Daphne Kendall. Yes.
Did we overlook 2 items, travel expenditure and tuition rates, or is that in a consent agenda?
That's in consent.
That's in the consent agenda, and we'll have time to talk about it if you want to talk, if you have questions.
I
Okay.
didn't want to overlook.
Okay, yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will keep this very brief, as it is getting very late, and we talk about facilities all the time. Facilities met yesterday for many hours here. We had a few community members with some questions, and I don't know if it's coming. And as Steve mentioned earlier, the Facilities Committee helped oversee the installation of this sign, one of the first of many celebrations of Bill Cirillo. So thank you to Stephanie and Gary Weissman for ensuring that it was in time for the PTO celebration on April 21st. The next facilities meeting will be here at Valley Road on Monday, May 21st at 11 o'clock. Thanks.
Thanks. And now Finance with Chair Bill Hare, given that we've had a budget meeting tonight. I don't know if you have much more, but it's, off
I'll
you
see if
go.
I can keep it as short as Daphne. So we met today at 10:30, and we will meet next on May 22nd at 10:30. We had one visitor from the public today. These are open meetings. Please come attend, ask questions. You can look at all the bills like we did today. We discussed the budget today as well, the one we voted on tonight. We discussed some financial aspects of the referendum, including ESIPs, which maybe Beth can briefly speak about.
We just discussed the fact that I think it's $19 million worth of ESIPs, and these are energy savings improvement plan projects, which are a separate funding stream from the referendum. They actually are, there's a state program under the Board of Public Utilities Clean Energy Program, and these things are for projects like LED lights and room sensors, and these are all kind of green things that will pay for themselves over 15 years, and it's a special state program, and we are in the process of getting having our audit done of our facilities so that we are able to then to go out and get bids on these projects.
That seemed very spontaneous back and forth between you and me, right? We didn't have that planned. We also discussed trying to do somewhat of a deep school-by-school analysis of some of the expenses and the invoices. So Stephanie's gonna come in with a box that we will try to go through. People from the public are invited to come for that as well. I'd like to mention a couple donations that we talked about that I don't know if they're going to be coming up later, but there was a donation from the Hamilton YMCA Aquatic Club for pool equipment that was about $4,800 donation for the JW pool. We'd like to thank them for that, and then we'd also like to thank the Little Brook PTO for about $18,275 worth of iPads and Chromebooks for the Little Brook Elementary School, but we might be talking about that later. May 22nd, 10:30, please join us.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, next is personnel with Chair Debbie Bronfeld.
Hi. So we didn't meet this month, but we will be meeting Friday, May 4th, all day to review all the candidates who are non-tenure. And if needed, we also have Monday, May 7th to do that. The board will be approving tonight the PRESA contract, which will be extended into 2020. And those meetings are all closed. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, next, policy with Chair Greg Stankiewicz.
Thanks. Just very briefly, we met on April 13th, but we really, with everything else going on, we focused more on the referendum. And so we don't have any policies for the meeting tonight, but we did want to let everyone know that based on the feedback from our last meeting, we're going to be developing sort of the outlines and the framework of our broader approach to anti-bias and equity issues. And we really appreciate the work together and ideas. We want the whole board to see the broader framework in which we want to put the policy in place before we ask the board to vote on a second reading on that. And that will also allow us to coordinate with the president, vice president, and with the coordinator across the committees in terms of all the different, not just policies, but the different areas that we as a board should look at to develop a more sort of comprehensive approach to all these things. And so we really appreciate that. Our next meeting is on May 11th. The public portion of that starts at 10:15 in the morning, and we'll be developing that and getting back on track on the bylaws and the other policies that we're reviewing as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Greg. And next is Student Achievement with Chair Betsy Baglio.
Thanks, Pat. The Student Achievement Committee met here in this room twice in the last month, on Monday, March 26th, and Friday, April 20th. The overnight trips you see on tonight's agenda were approved. Andrew Levine, the new Director of Technology and Innovation in our district, attended Student Achievement to give an update on the work of his department. This work includes the development of a 3-year plan by the Technology Steering Committee. The committee thanked him for this presentation and looks forward to the submission of his plan to Student Achievement in November or December. Jessica Baxter and Gary Snyder from the high school attended Student Achievement to share the results of the second Stanford Challenge Success Survey with the committee. Results were similar to last year's, and the Student Achievement Committee has asked to hear more about this work set in a larger context over the summer. Drafts of an upcoming parent climate survey that all parents in the district will receive were discussed at both meetings. These surveys will be distributed to parents. The plan is to distribute them in May, and the board truly encourages all families to complete it. They'll be completing it once for every child who are in that they have in the public schools. Last week, Principal Gary Snyder returned to Student Achievement with a draft. Actually, I think it's more than a draft. It's the final schedule that will be shared with the high school for this fall. It's actually already been shared with the high school PTO as well. And the committee thanks Mr. Snyder and the Bell Committee who worked on this. Many educators within the high school, parents, students were engaged for all of their leadership and vision regarding the development of the new schedule. And the committee looks forward to the schedule being shared with the full board later this spring. It is quite exciting. Mark Shelley, our Director of Supervisor of Humanities, described the vision for the Humanities Department in the coming years, and a steering committee comprised of educators from both the History and English departments is currently meeting to consider, among other things, the development of paired classes in 9th and 10th grade related to world history and literature and American history and literature. So the Student Achievement Committee looks forward to Mr. Shelley returning with the committee's recommendations later this year. Our May meeting date has changed. It will be Friday, May 11th at 11:30 a.m. The public is invited and encouraged to attend.
Betsy, I just want to ask about the Challenge Success Survey.
Yes.
So one of the things that I'm concerned about is we spend so much time on this referendum, and the ancillary issues around the referendum, we're kind of forgetting our focus on this is for the kids, obviously, but focusing on the kids. And so this Challenge Success Survey was a long time in the making. We had one result last year, and I think the pressure from the board last year was to make sure that action plans were put into place that same spring, not to let it drag into the summer and the fall, because then it's another generation of kids that you don't have affected. And so if you think that, I think the community, we owe it to the community to share the results of Challenge Success maybe at our next meeting, but also I think we need to have a plan to address whatever the outcomes of Challenge Success number 2 is. What are we going to do next year? Who's going to be doing it? Is it something that's going through the whole administration, or is it one person who's kind of got a little pet project on the side? It should be fundamental to the changes in the school, and so I'm very concerned to hear that it's going into the summer. I just don't like the sound of that. And by the way, we also have the survey you just mentioned for parents. We have the racial survey that we still haven't seen results from, and all these things, when the results come through, which they should soon, we should have plans that people own also very soon, not off in the summer sometime.
So thank you for that. Let me speak to a few things. First of all, rest assured, Student Achievement is constantly thinking about students, teaching, learning, staff, students, and so we appreciate the work of all the committees. Obviously, this referendum work we have is huge, but we do constantly bring it back to the work of our teachers and our students. So that is one thing. Secondly, Jessica and Gary, when they came with the results, they said, first of all, this survey is actually being and obviously, Steve, if you want to jump in at any point, they're encouraging districts, the Stanford Challenge Success Group is encouraging districts to give this survey actually every other year. Now, we gave it every year to sort of, because we were eager to get some data and act on the data. So going forward, I believe it will be given, the next time would be December of 2019. So there actually has been quite a bit done since the first, and actually Daphne wrote an email, and she has it right here. So Daphne actually said, just to note, by the 2-year anniversary of the first survey, which will be this December, we have in place a later start time, a rotating block schedule, a morning break, more time for lunch, math homework policy revisions, 9th grade specific homework revisions. I should let you read this. It was your list. Additional guidance staff, option 2, and homework guidelines, which are still underway. Quite a bit has been
And
done.
I forgot one thing after I wrote this. When Gary Senator came to SAC the last time with the new rotating block schedule, Pat, you'll like this. Every child will have a free period once during the 6-day cycle. So hopefully that will help kids too.
And some other benefits, actually, which we'll let Mr. Snyder report to the board that are within that schedule. But I do agree with you that getting this in sort of an action plan, larger context is really important. Why we say the summer is Annie and I spoke about it. So Superintendent Cochran, Principal Snyder, and Jessica Baxter, Vice Principal Baxter, are attending a Challenge Success Conference in Boston in July, where they'll meet with Challenge Success staff, but also peer schools that are going through the same type of work that we're engaging in. And it's after that that we sort of intend to, our August meeting for student achievement, really dive into this. So I hear you that we don't want to wait on this, but I think quite a bit of work has been done.
Okay,
to
good.
date.
We just have to not lose sight of that. Okay. Alternative revenues, no report this month? Or are we reporting?
No, we hope to have something. We have nothing to report. There are talks continuing. We hope to have some, we had hoped to have some news by April 1st. That didn't happen. We hope to have, and by today because of our budget, but we hope to have some news shortly.
Great, thank you. Thank you for all your work. And then last, the Equity Committee with Chair Betsy Bagley.
Fine, just very, very briefly, the work of this new Equity Committee is continuing, and I just want to thank the board members and administrators who are involved for engaging in this work. Members of the committee and administrators met with supervisors at a supervisors meeting at Princeton High School on March 27th, and then the committee met again in public session on April 12th. At the April 12th meeting, additional staff members joined our committee. The Princeton Children's Fund shared information regarding their initiatives for our students of this district, as well as the charter school, and the committee continued to discuss school trips in our district. Our next meeting is a public meeting, May 3rd at 9:30, and we encourage you to attend.
Okay, thank you. Thanks all the committees for all your work over the last month. It's really been a busy month. I think I tried to talk someone into being a school board member, and I said, it's not a lot of work, don't worry about it. But it's really, this year has been particularly tough on everybody, and we appreciate all the time you put into this. So with that, item K, public forum. If anyone has any questions or comments on any agenda item, please feel free to come now. And again, we'll try and limit you to 3 minutes if we can.
No open topics?
I really appreciate the Cranberry presentation tonight. That cleared up a lot of things. It totally makes sense that it's not worth going through any of that, even if there were some type of benefit with the size of the building, whatever. So that's great. What I guess is a kind of a follow-up question, though, which is interesting again. I mean, what would we do without Cranberry is kind of a better question. And I don't know if that has been years of, I hate to say fiscal irresponsibility, but what would we, could we not run our schools without the Cranberry money? So that begs me to think, where is all that money going? And I know it's built into the fungible budget at this point. It's all part of everything that we do. But I think it's important considering what might be changing with enrollment for Cranberry. Also, I wanted to point out that when you look at the per pupil cost that Beth pointed out, the $19,000, because this was an area of interest to me, I took a look at in the taxpayers, the guide. I looked at the other top performing public schools in the state, and we pay anywhere between $6,000 to $3,000, maybe even $9,000. I think my range might be $3,000 to $9,000 more per student in that per pupil cost, not the bigger number that's the $24.25. And I think it's something we have to look at. Why does it cost us so much more to send? I mean, yes, we have an excellent school system. There's no doubt about it. But why does it cost us so much more to provide that education? I think it's an important question. And in looking at the number is in the salaries line. It's 69% of our budget. Are we, if you look, and that's kind of my question about the audit, or how many students be served by program, by teacher, what are we doing differently? Because that's where the numbers are. We are not spending more on benefits. We are not spending more to run our buildings. We are not spending more. So that's really where the real difference lies in comparison to comparable schools and of sizes. I just want to kind of put that out there.
Thank you. When you make the comparison, the dollar amounts, per pupil dollar amounts, and I don't know what districts you're referring to, look as well at the demographics. Look at the percentage of special needs students, the percentage of students with ELL students, English language learners, students on free and reduced lunch. The demographics in our district are often significantly different than some of the other high-performing districts, suburban districts.
Understood, and I understand a good part of that is the excellent autism program we provide. That may be 4 million of that number in total, but again, it's still a significant difference. And I looked at Millburn, Chatham, trying to put similar sizes with similar kind of scales. I don't know if Tenafly was another one.
The other factor sometimes is the number of students, special needs students that we're bringing into the district. So you mentioned the autism program. It's very expensive to send those students out, maybe $100,000 or more per student. But that doesn't, when they're sent out, they don't get factored into the per pupil formula. So we are actually saving money by bringing them in, but it raises our per pupil cost. In terms of the way the formula is calculated. So there's a lot of nuance to this, and it's great that people are asking the questions and trying to become educated, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
But Wendy, just so you have the statistics, if you want to write them down, approximately 15% of our kids have IEPs.
Right.
12% are free and reduced lunch, and then we have about 7% who are on 504 plans. So when you do your comparisons,
and I guess you'd have to look at those same numbers elsewhere, and if it were different.
Mm-hmm.
And do we know that's the case? We're significantly higher on those?
I think we're a little higher on IEPs, but we're definitely much higher than surrounding districts on the free and reduced lunch.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at West Windsor or Montgomery, I'm not sure where you're looking, but certainly the demographics
that was
here
not
are very,
comparable. Not because of the scale and the size. And Stephanie, I know how hard it is to do that budget, but that was great. Yeah. I know it's very hard to get those numbers to work. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments on our last public forum? Yes, sir.
I didn't sign up. Can I go?
I'm sorry, we can't let you do. No, I'm just kidding. No, you're welcome to. Yeah.
All right. So there's a little bit of a story, but it's. Sure. Hamza Nishtar, senior student council president, Griggs Farm kid, with Amy as well. Is Mr. Montgomery here? No. Okay. So here's the story. Today, before I came here, I was with Amy shoveling soil into my Eagle Scout project, my garden beds. Finished that today. Mr. Sullivan was my former scoutmaster, and so the two beds my project was creating two beds to replace dilapidated beds by the lacrosse fields. And so my original plan was to build in the courtyards, but I guess since they weren't really being used, the expansion is kind of looking to fill those courtyards up. And last Friday, during the Jazz Fest, from 5 to 11 o'clock, I was in the Princeton High School woodshop with Mr. Van Velsor. He was with me the whole time. You should give him a raise. But yeah, cutting lumber with some great volunteers, fellow seniors who had no idea our school had a wood shop. And so I guess my concern is kind of the concern that some of my teachers have brought up with me in regards to the referendum, which is that you give them these expensive spaces, but they don't really feel kind of supported in learning how to use those spaces. So for example, we have these garden beds, but we don't have a horticulture class to kind of keep those beds maintained. We have courtyards, but I've never had a class that takes place in those courtyards. We've never taken advantage of that space. We have a wood shop, but many of my friends who've been in the school for 4 years, they didn't know we had a wood shop. And when I went there, it was so cool. There was miter saws and everything. So many opportunities to use that space. And so I guess my question would be for Mr. Cochran, how, if the referendum is passed, how will we support teachers to learn how to use those spaces that we create?
That is the best question. We are absolutely thinking about that because you're right. We wouldn't want to build these flexible learning spaces and then have our teachers not just simply lecture in them and teach as the spaces have confined them to do thus far. So we are, for the last year and a half, we've been focused a lot on problem-based learning, hands-on kind of applications of learning, differentiated instruction. And we actually, through the architects, are partnering with Heidi Hayes-Jacobs, who's a professional, actually world-renowned educator on some of these same topics about how we think of contemporary learning, sort of classical learning and then contemporary learning, how we can use space to have some whole group kinds of instruction, but then also have smaller groups, have individuals doing research, have interdisciplinary kinds of experiences for students. So all of that, the high school has not only a design team of teachers and administrators that's looking at the space, they have what they call the CIA. It's the Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Team. Very secret team. You're hearing it here first. So the CIA at the high school met just this week through Zoom with Heidi Hayes-Jacobs. She was up in her house up in Westchester, and they were talking about some of these same questions, like how do we, what kinds of moves can we make, what kind of changes can we make in our curriculum and the way we're teaching, the way we're assessing that match with the spaces that we're getting, and also with what we know about the kind of skills that you're going to need to be successful in the world in which you graduate. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. It's very exciting work, though, and we do have teachers and administrators who are very focused on making sure that when that space comes online, we're ready to use it. So, great question.
Okay, thanks, Hamza. Any other questions for our public forum? Okay, if there aren't any, then we'll move to item L, which is L1. I need a motion for, and we're going to have a roll call vote on that. So, can I have a motion for L1? Chairman Braunfeld, and second, Bill Hare. Well, it's personnel, so. Yeah. And so this is a roll call vote.
It's a roll call vote.
Yeah.
Okay. Patrick Sullivan?
Yes.
Betsy Baglio?
Yes.
Beth Barron? Yes. Debbie Braunfeld?
Yes.
Jess Deutsch?
Yes.
Bill Hare?
Yes.
Daphne Kendall?
Yes.
Evelyn Spahn?
Yes.
Greg Stankowitz?
Yes.
And Michelle Tuck-Ponder.
Yes.
Thank you. Passes.
Okay, so the rest of L are consent items, but I think as long as we're here, I'd just like to mention the PRESA agreement, and some of the other people who are on the team might want to say something about that. Would you like to?
So it was a marathon session, and I left after 2 hours because my daughter had a band concert that I had to go to. But I would like to say, if we had more money in the budget, the first group I would like to give it to is PRESA. They are by far the most hardest working, least paid members of our district. So that's why I had to leave, because I was going to just get the checkbook out. So.
But I'd like to thank you, Debbie, for all your work. Actually, I was, trying to be there, and then somebody told me it's almost over, and then you stayed for five more hours to get it done. But it just shows the level of cooperation between our unions and this administration, this board right now I think is extraordinary. I've lived through times when it wasn't that way, and I'm happy to be living in times when it is that way. We respect each other very much. And we're happy that we're able to do the right thing. I can't, people who have lived through it know how disruptive it was when there was a labor contract every 3 years, and then it would be up again before the 3 years was over. So every year and a half almost, we were at odds with each other. And so this approach now, this is our last major labor contract, 3 more years out, is going to allow all of us to really focus on the kids. And so, Debbie, I particularly appreciate all the work that you've done, but Debbie Daphne is part of our team to make this happen. It's been wonderful, and so I just want to thank you guys on behalf of this whole community for the stress that we're not feeling because we have good relationships with our unions.
Thank you.
And I would also say that all the teachers, the support staff, we're also extremely appreciative that we could have a really nice dialogue. I mean, it was 5 hours, but it was just going back and forth.
But it was one night.
One night, it was.
That was it. And it was a great conversation, and I thank the board members. I really want to thank Lou Goldstein, our assistant superintendent, who does a lot of the work to put everything together, the spreadsheets, and has those strong relationships with our staff. So it was a group effort, and thanks to everyone here, and thanks to our support staff who made it such an easy process.
Right. Okay. And then if we're moving on to item M, which is also all consent, right, Ms. Kennedy? So if there's any questions on item M, and by the way, if you want to go back to those other, the field trip items that were in item L, I believe it was. But yes, Michelle.
My question has to do with the student overnight trips, and I know how they get paid for since I had to pay for some. My question is, if no child will be denied access to the trip due to the expense, where does that money come from?
That is something, can I step into this? We talk about this every meeting, especially in student achievement, but I feel like every meeting I attend. So every time a trip comes to the Student Achievement Committee, there's a template now that is filled out, and one line is fundraising and sort of how and they must state this again, that no child will be denied. So for these specific trips, they did describe exactly how they would fundraise if necessary. The choir and band trips are really sort of their own thing. They have quite a bit of fundraising. It's sort of a fundraising machine. And Mr. Lenahan came and said, parents are asked, for example, to pledge a certain time before the trip. So this is taking place next February. So he was saying parents will pledge how much they're able to contribute toward the trip, and then the choir figures out how they'll be fundraising for the rest of that. But we have also asked Mr. Lenahan to give us a breakdown of what students are involved in the music program. So we're just trying to make sure that no students are self-selecting out of opportunities because of their inability to pay. But again, we do talk about this, and it's at the top of mind at this committee and the equity committee as well.
How much, I know the junior state trip is around $350. How much is the Odyssey of the Mind trip, and how much is the high school choir trip?
I actually don't have that in front of me.
Anybody know?
Right. Yeah, we can
Okay.
get that to you.
Because, because I think the self-select is important, because if your kid comes home and
Absolutely.
says something's gonna cost $1,200, a lot of parents are gonna say, don't even try it. I mean, it's just not, it's so far out of reach.
Well, and I could just address something real quick. Odyssey of the Mind does its own fundraising. It's not all of it, but it is a decent portion of it. So just want to make sure you were aware of that real quick.
Right, so if a kid wants to be in Odyssey of the Mind, is there one tournament? Are there multiple tournaments, and how much does it cost?
The state and regionals, in order, regionals then states, are both completely free, and any materials that you use are reimbursed by the fundraising that happens. It's only Worlds where I believe you'd have to pay for where you would have to pay for plane tickets.
But the room and board, once you get to Worlds, is covered by the chapter?
I'm actually not too sure about that.
I think
I'm not going to the wrong
last
spot. I
year
think we're
we
good.
had contribution from the Institute for Advanced Study that helped pay for that.
I know there's a concern too, Michelle. It's been a concern of mine over the years. Is also to your point. Put yourself in the shoes of that kid. How do you go about telling somebody? Do you have to walk to the front of the room and tell an adult like I can't afford that? Like how does it work so you can just go and not feel like you're some sort of some sort of
And I
bribe?
express that concern because I know at the elementary school, we say it all the time. If you want to do an after-school camp, you'll never be denied access if you can't afford it. But you still have to make that walk, and you still have to ask.
Actually, one of the outcomes, this is now the equity committee, but again, it relates to policy, finance, most of the committees I've been involved in. We are looking for there to be a very consistent statement and message that goes out to parents with every single ask, whether it's for $5 for a, whatever it might be, to a $3,000 trip, we don't want people to feel like they have to come to the teacher or come to the office, but that there's, and that's, much of that is already happening. There are many educators who know who these families are and are reaching out to them, but there are a lot of people that people would not know. And I 100% agree with you that this consistency is something that we want to just be part of everything that when we make an ask.
And two other questions. Is there a middle school trip? Is there a middle school trip to Canada and one to Washington, D.C.?
Yes, so we've approved, the Canada trip was approved either last month or the month before. And then the Washington, D.C. trip, I don't believe we actually may have approved. We haven't yet? So we hear about all of these. We worked quite a bit actually with the Quebec trip this year. The D.C. trip, those dates have been announced, but I'll have to check and see if, I guess that hasn't come to us yet.
But we also have a little bit of a travel fund in the budget. So
Right. So the
the equity
travel fund.
So
Right. It is, the equity fund was primarily created 2 years ago, 2016, to help alleviate the burden that the JWPTO was feeling for fundraising for specifically the Washington, D.C. trip. So we have a field trip policy that indicates that our field trips are in one of three categories, and anything that is a field trip specifically that has to do with the curriculum, we bear that burden to pay for any student who is unable to attend. So that equity fund was put in place for that DC trip specifically to ensure that all of the 8th graders who'd like to go are able to go. And that trip has been scheduled for October of this year.
All right. Thank you.
thanks. Okay.
On item M, if I could just really quickly say something, has there been a calendar for the 2018-2019 after-school activity-free and homework-free nights?
Not yet. We are currently discussing that, though, because that is something that I know the Student Achievement Committee would like to see, and we've spoken with Superintendent Cochran about publishing a list of those homework-free days, but also considering a few activity and homework-free evenings as well.
Okay, great.
So
Thank you.
we're working on it. Thank you.
So that was item M. If there's any other questions on item M, then we move on to item N. Anything on item N that people have questions or comments on? And if not, we'll move on to item O. And I think this is the one, if I'm not mistaken, we have a few Little Brook parents on the board. Would someone like to say anything about our Little Brook donation? Bill mentioned it already.
Yeah,
but-
no, I'd like to thank Little Brook. The PTO donated $18,275 in iPads and Chromebooks. I know that Stephanie worked very closely with them to ensure a smooth transaction, so thank you to Little Brook. And also thank you to the Hamilton YMCA for the clean air system. My daughter is on a swim team that practices there. Those systems have made a huge difference for the air quality, both for the kids and for the parents who are watching from upstairs. So,
And the board paid for the additional ones.
Oh.
Hamilton paid for one, and then the board paid for, I think, 4 others.
well, thank you, because, you know, we talk about health and wellness, and really, used to smell chlorine everywhere in that building, and it really makes such a difference. So, thank you, and thank you to Hamilton YMCA.
Okay. Yeah. That gets a round of applause too, right? Yeah, thanks. We do appreciate that. Okay, so that, anything else on item O? Any questions, comments on O? And if not, then we need a motion on item P, which is consent.
Right, can we
No?
go back to the HIB, though? We have there's 2 HIB votes.
Okay.
And one, I'd like to open up as a vote, and then the other can be part of the consent.
Okay, so we have a HIB
E1, we need a motion and a second.
motion. with-
E1? So we got
Michelle
Michelle.
and Betsy.
Betsy.
Okay, this is a little different, so why are we doing it like this?
We're taking it out of.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can, if,
and we're doing this electronically then?
we can.
How else would we do it? The good old analog way?
Mm-hmm.
That'll be fine.
Okay. Show of hands. All in favor? Okay.
And
The noes? Okay. Abstains? Got it.
Okay. All right, so that gets us to item P.
Thank
So
you.
can I have a motion for item P, the consent items on our agenda? Debbie?
Wait, now I gotta get all the way back down the
Okay.
bottom. So now we're on consent, okay, and we're going to open that up, and it's going to be Debbie. Okay, second, Bill?
Second, Bill?
Wait, I
And
can't
we're
see.
going to do this electronically, right?
Yes, electronically. This is for all of the other items on the agenda that we're not voting on individually.
Okay. Good?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
This is we've had a lot of public comment tonight, which is great, but we have one last public comment on the agenda, open topics on item Q. If anyone in the audience would like to say anything that hasn't been said already, yes. This is your last chance. And
It's open mic night.
seeing no one running to grab the microphone. Oh, so someone is running to grab the microphone. So, and we'll keep you to the 2 minute threshold that we've used for everyone else.
There we go. Ready, go. Okay. The educational process by which Princeton Public
Sorry,
Schools...
could you just identify yourself?
Oh, yeah. Callum Binney, sophomore at Princeton High School. All right, never mind. So I'm here to address the administrative process and system that runs at John Witherspoon Middle School. During my time at JW, I noticed a series of flaws in the way that the administration dealt with disciplinary actions and incidents at the middle school. Middle school, as many people know, is a time when students undergo both social, mental, and physical changes that they have to deal with. And as a student, I saw there was very little attention given to that change that students had to go through. I saw that students were very rarely given a constructive opportunity to express how they were feeling and what they needed to, and what they really need to get out. I saw there was very little attention to the physical needs and exercise needs of students, particularly boys, who were often told to sit still and be quiet. I myself was told several times to be quiet in a capacity that was neither constructive nor respectful. And it's hard for me to do this in 2 minutes, but essentially, I asked, because I don't think it's given much attention, especially as we're considering adding new buildings for a 5th and 6th grade school, that you do a full look into actually what happens right up into a student disagreeing with the teacher, or when a student needs to go and meet with the vice principal or disciplinarian, and what happens there, even if there's no real punishment, no suspension or detention or whatever, to see actually what happens there and if there's any sort of conversation. Because in my experience, there was not. There was a routine pattern of intimidation and bullying of students. I think that which would fall clearly under the definition, the school's definition of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. I think in this day and age, it is time to completely abolish the position of disciplinarian. I don't think there's any reason an 11-year-old should have to meet with a disciplinarian. I think that I have a number of things that I wanted to cover. That isn't the full extent of my concern with JW, but I would like to make aware that I highly suggest you look into that. I had one or two things I just want to quickly go through. I don't think there was enough attention to given the fact that the results of the second Stanford Success Survey were pretty much the same as the first one, given that I think there was consensus that the results of the first one were not good. I was hoping there could be some elaboration on the new guidance staff that was added, which I saw was mentioned. I wanted to make clear that you actually cut back on mental health resources, given the 2 interns, a concern raised by Dr. Rosenfeld, in a time where mental health is one of the biggest problems that high school students are facing. Regarding security of the school, the security guards that were added are hardly an intrusion, in my opinion. They are merely help you open the door if you get to school late or have a free period. Enough. I don't need to talk about Cranberry students. Enough's been said on that. I was curious about the Cranberry's contribution to the budget. I by no means advocate for removing Cranberry students. I'm staunchly against that, but I was wondering, shouldn't there be some plan in place for any reason if we did have to end our relationship with Cranberry schools, if we had to compensate for that loss in budget? And for any reason, is there any plan to compensate for the loss of funding if there was some reason to end the relationship? I wasn't sure if there was. And way over 2 minutes.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but
yeah,
we've limited everyone else, so I have to be fair. So thank you, Callum.
Thank you, Callum.
Okay, any other questions or comments for item Q? Any other public comments? And if there are none, then closing discussion, I think I'd just like to thank, again, Finance Committee for that, and Vic, who's now left, for that great presentation. I think hopefully it puts to bed once and for all the question, why don't we just kick out Cranberry and solve all our problems? So, but it was very thoughtful and well thought out presentation, so I appreciate that very much, and I think the public appreciated it as well. Our next meeting in May is I believe our sort of no agenda.
Personnel.
Uh,
There are action items.
a broader conversation with the community. So again, anybody who's, who enjoys having discussions with us, the next meeting is really the time to have a dorm room, conversation with the board. Yes, Michelle.
I just have one question, and that's about the consent agenda. And I'm wondering if there's any way we can structure our agenda differently so that all the consent items are together, or are we obligated or required to organize our agenda in the way it's been organized? Because it is a little confusing hopping back and forth and not really knowing, well, do I get to vote on this, or should I let somebody know that I have an issue with this? So can we organize it differently?
So to respond to part of it is, what would be best is if the board, when they review the agenda, if they have something that they want to vote on that's marked as a consent, let me know ahead of time, ahead of the meeting. Then I can switch it to an action item instead of a consent item.
So
it's
it
easier to
is
do that
marked
through-
under type.
Yeah.
So when it says
Type, it's action or
action or consent. So
But
it would be nice. I mean,
but it
I have
would
a,
be nice if we could
I agree
have
with
it
you.
more visual in a
Yes.
different
Yeah,
way.
but let me explain, that it's by category, so it's by department. So it would really be, a discussion of, how, if the whole board feels that they want it to be different, then it could be, there's no real reason other than coordination of all the financial pieces are under the finance, all curriculum's under curriculum, all personnel's under personnel.
But typically, everything's consent except for the approval
Personnel.
of the minutes from the last meetings. Those are voting, and then the personnel items are roll call.
Right.
And pretty much everything else is
pretty
consent.
much consent.
So
yeah.
we could actually have an agenda that says action items and consent agenda. We could.
And group them that
Yeah.
way? I mean, does it any way that it has to group, like ABC? Could we do all the?
It would just, I think, lessen the confusion, certainly
Yeah,
for
yeah, I
me
know.
to.
Yes.
So, that's
Okay,
just
well, let's
my
think about
suggestion.
that.
I'll look at-
Let's
I'll
see,
look to
it's
see,
good,
yeah.
good suggestion. Okay, any other questions before we adjourn? Can we have a motion to adjourn? Daphne, second. Beth? So thank you for everyone for coming out. Meeting adjourned.